markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. You have 10 of the 11 major industry groups in the S&P 500 higher right now. Communication services, that's in the lead of the biggest drag right now. That is coming from healthcare. And after adding to its record close, up again today, shares of NVIDIA right now up 0.4%, 1,041. And although the best performing stock in the S&P 500, that actually belongs to the maker of Uggs. I didn't know that was still a thing.
It is still a thing. I
don't know. I have a pair of sneakers. Deckers Outdoors, those shares, they are up right now close to 13%. Did get data today, the inflation expectations for the University of Michigan. Consumers tempering their inflation expectations. Still, Lee Farage at State Street says a Fed rate hike is not out of the realm of possibilities right now.
A hike is still a tail risk. It's not a central view. I would put it 25%, okay, which is probably much higher than probably a lot of people would put it, but still a tail risk. But it's there. And, the Fed have openly talked about hikes. They haven't mentioned the hike word for a year, but now they're starting to talk about it.
Right now, the S&P 500 is up 25 points, a rise of 0.5% at 52.92. The Dow Jones Industrial Average 18 points higher, 39,082. The Nasdaq 100 is up 137 points. That's a rise of 0.75%. Two-year yield right now unchanged, 493. The 10-year yield unchanged at 447. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Mike and Alex.
All right, thank you so much, John Tucker. I'm Alex Steele alongside Mike Regan. Paul Sweeney is off today. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We cover all the top news in business and economics through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence analysts. They cover 2,000 companies and 130 industries worldwide. They do all the work, so we don't have to, and that's why we're going to go to one of them right now. In the studio on Memorial Day Friday, that's huge. Eric Edelberg is Chief Mortgage-Backed Securities Strategist, there we go, for Bloomberg Intelligence. Help us understand what's a mortgage-backed security for those who are listening, and then sort of where are we right now? I mean, it's going to be tied to the mortgage market. How's it going?
Hi, Alex and Mike. Thanks for having me, and happy Memorial Day weekend almost to everybody. So a mortgage-backed security is a security that a bank or non-bank lender creates out of the loans that they've lent to the homeowner. They pool up these mortgage loans into these massive securities. It's about almost a $9 trillion mortgage market for the agency MBS market, and much bigger if you include portfolio loans and non-agencies. So it's a massive market. It really helps fuel the entire housing economy, which in turn helps fuel a lot of the economy. So it's a really important sector to keep an eye on. And it's been suffering a little bit recently because it's so important to the economy. When the economy went into free fall, both back in 2008 and then various times since, including during the pandemic, the Federal Reserve has purchased massive amounts of these mortgage-backed securities. And with inflation going rampant and the Fed actually trying to put the brakes a little bit on the economy, they've been letting that portfolio run off. So the mortgage-backed securities market has been really hurting as a result because a lot of investors have backed away from that market. But at the same time, because the housing market has slowed down so much and so many people own rates so far above current market rates, there's not a lot of business for mortgage originators to do right now.
I know, I feel like I keep getting emails from like mortgage brokers being like, call me, we can do stuff. And I'm like, dude, I got a 2.75% 30-year fix, no thanks.
Eric, I wanted to ask you about that exact topic. Should Alex refinance? No, that's not it. But
that's never happening.
It's not happening in this rate environment. But you write in a recent piece, elevated mortgage rates and home prices have depressed housing turnover and mortgage lending, as Alex points out. And then you go on to say, this has begun spurring, quote, innovations in mortgage lending. I get a little nervous when I hear about, quote unquote, innovations in mortgage lending, thinking back to the financial crisis and what happened in the MBS market and the housing market. Unpack for us a little bit what some of these innovations are, and are they as risky as the innovations that brought us 2008?
That's an excellent question. And I had the honor of attending the Mortgage Banker Association Secondary Market Conference this week, where they touched on a lot of that exact topic. And, you know, the good news is, even though memories tend to be short in the financial world, the memories, the scars from the 2008 financial crisis cut very deep. So as a result, if you look at credit standards, for instance, they're still almost as high as they've ever been. You know, both banks and non-banks really drew in their claws, and the agencies, Fannie, Freddie, and Ginnie Mae, have all made a big effort to both expand perhaps the potential market for whom credit can be offered, mortgage credit, that is, loans, but at the same time do it in a sustainable fashion. You know, their mantra is not only to make mortgages available to as many people as possible, but to keep as many people in their homes as possible. So it's become a dual mandate ever since 2008, and it really is the North Star, I think, for most of the people in the mortgage industry, because even non-bank lenders who theoretically have a little less skin in the game, they do have to repurchase mortgages if they violate rep and warrants and, you know, do other types of predatory lending practices. So on the good news, everybody's trying to work within those constraints to try to come up with new ideas. I mean, I will say that, for instance, Freddie, one of the areas that is possible growth area is always first-time borrowers, especially with millennials coming into that window for the first time, which is the largest demographic. So while they're having problems finding homes to buy, they're also sometimes having problems coming up with the down payments that maybe a repeat borrower could come up with because they don't have home equity built up in the first place. So housing market is relatively unaffordable. So what a lot of different areas are doing, in particular both the GSEs and Ginnie Mae, is they are trying to improve access to down payment assistance. But it's for people with positive, good credit scores. So
how does that happen? Like, where do you get that?
Well, there's actually a big educational program to try to tell people where this can come from. And usually that down payment assistance comes with, you know, a lot of insurance, extra insurance costs and things like that. But literally, I don't know the exact amount, but I think it's a $25,000 credit towards down payments, for instance, that Fannie and Freddie can tap into. And Ginnie Mae, for instance, FHA and VA both allow up to 95 to 100% of the loan to be financed. Again, that comes with extra mortgage insurance costs. But if getting your foot in the door is the difference between having a down payment or not, especially for first-generation homeowners, for instance, who don't have that generational wealth, then finding ways to get those people down payments is an issue. You know, is perhaps the game changer. The problem is, you know, if the homeowner therefore has no skin in the game, because they haven't put down a down payment, are they more willing and likely to walk away? Which is why they get charged extra insurance, homeowner insurance costs to be in that.
You know, with mortgage rates the way they are, my guess would be that the yields on MBS are looking pretty attractive. But I'm wondering what you're seeing as far as spreads. You know, is the lack of issuance sort of keeping those spreads down? How are you sort of sussing out the opportunities in the MBS market?
Right, that's a very good question. And low supply has been a tailwind for the sector, but because volatility in the markets has been so high, it's actually pressured mortgage spreads much wider than usual. And you don't have somebody like the Fed or even banks have been kind of stepping away as well recently, coming in as the buyer of last resort. You're relying on relative value investors who care a lot about risk return. They care a lot about hedging. So as a result, spreads actually went all the way out to like 190 basis points for the current coupon for new issue to treasuries back in October. They've since come in. They're around 140 basis points. But like when the Fed was buying in 2021, they were as tight as 70 basis points for new issue. So they're still very wide relative to history, especially relative to the 15 years since the Fed started buying securities.
Erica, really appreciate it. Thank you so very much. I learned a ton. Eric Edelberg, Bloomberg Intelligence Chief Mortgage-Backed Securities Strategist on mortgage lending, on the market, and all the new rules and everything going into it and how to make a good investment out of it. Are you in a market to refinance, Mike, or anything like that? Or are you stuck?
I'm at like 3.25. I'm not refinancing. You'll refinance
and
my
like,
estate.
You're going to die in that house. Like, I'm going to die in this apartment.
Oh,
Like,
yeah, probably from avian flu, most
Maybe.
likely.
Probably a little bit sooner than
That's my latest theory. Is
I'm so happy that we could help you
out.
with this.
Yeah,
this is great. I feel really good about myself. All right, Erica, thanks a lot. Coming up, Mike and I are going to talk about snakes on a plane. How about dogs on their own plane? This, to me, is honestly the story of the day. We're going to break break all that down for you on this very quiet market day. Happy Friday before Memorial Day weekend. This is Bloomberg.
Your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
And I'm John Tucker, the newsroom. We'll get some of the company stories we're following. Let's start off with Novo Nordisk. The blockbuster diabetes drug Ozempic cut patients' risk of dying in a kidney disease study. This is the latest research pointing to the medicine's usefulness in a constellation of disorders. Patients with kidney disease caused by diabetes were 1/5 less likely to die of any cause during the study if they took Ozempic. The findings add to evidence that Novo Nordisk's Ozempic for diabetes and Wegovy for weight loss can help with a host of interrelated conditions around obesity. They're likely going to change the way kidney disease is treated. Boeing says it's teaming up with its largest labor union and the Federal Aviation Administration. They're going to review safety issues reported by employees. This is all part of the broader effort to address concerns about the company's safety culture. The plane maker, in its third annual safety report just released, says a new event review committee will convene representatives from the regulator, Boeing, and the International Association of Machinists. The collaboration part of a broad effort to encourage more employees to elevate safety concerns after that door plug blew out that nearly new Boeing 737 MAX back in January this year. And a snack company, food company, Kellanova, which makes Pop-Tarts and Rice Krispies treats, is working to replace artificial additives and some of its products with natural alternatives. This comes after the dye in one of them was banned by California. Kellanova's actions could actually be a harbinger of what's to come as food companies navigate legislation on the use of dyes. California bans certain chemicals used in foods and candy as of 2027 after saying they cause health problems. That's your company news.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Friday, everybody. I'm Alex Steele. In with Mike Regan. Paul Sweeney is off today. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We are live from Interactive Broker Studio right here in Midtown Manhattan. We cover all the top news that you need to know through the lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence analysts. They cover 2,000 companies and 130 industries worldwide. We also keep you updated on world and national news. For that, we go to Michael Barr. Michael.
Thank you very much, Alex. Mike, John, the top United Nations court has ordered Israel to immediately halt its military operations in the southern Gaza city of Rafah, but stop short of ordering a full ceasefire. While Israel is unlikely to comply with today's order, it will ratchet up the pressure on the increasingly isolated country. Criticism of Israel's conduct in the war in Gaza has been growing, particularly on operations in Rafah. It has even come from its closest ally, the United States. Former President Trump made a campaign appearance in New York City yesterday. He held a rally in the South Bronx, one of the bluest areas of the country, to make a play for black and Hispanic voters. Trump is vowing to be better than President Biden on key issues, including immigration and the economy.
We're going to bring prosperity back to every neighborhood and every borough of the greatest city in our land. We're going to reduce taxes. We're going to bring businesses and big taxpayers back to New York.
Last night, several thousand people showed up for Trump. The district is more than 50% Hispanic and 30% black. The NCAA and its 5 power conferences have agreed to allow schools to directly pay players for the first time in the 100-plus year history of college sports. The organization says it's prepared to move forward with a multi-billion-dollar agreement to settle 3 pending antitrust cases. Sources say the NCAA will pay almost $2.8 billion over 10 years to current and former athletes. Executive Director of the National College Players Association, Ramoji Huma, says this is a game changer.
It would be an amazing step towards ending the NCAA's exploitation of college athletes. It would create a pathway towards out of poverty and into home ownership, owning a business, generational wealth. I think things would be significant in the lives of college athletes.
All Division I athletes dating back to 2016 are eligible to receive a share of the payout. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Alex, Mike, John.
All right, thanks so much, Michael Barr. Here is a wonderful story for everybody. It comes from the New York Post. Apparently, the first flight ever that's catered just for dogs on an airline called Bark Air departed from New York at 4 p.m. Eastern on Thursday and touched down in Los Angeles. It'll set you back about $6,000. Each ticket includes 1 dog and 1 human companion. If you want 2 humans to travel, another ticket will be purchased. How's that?
First, I have to tip my hat to you, Alex, for discovering the most important business story of the day. Without a doubt, yeah. I have so many questions, though. One is the dog a pilot? Is the pilot a dog?
This is a great question. I'm going to guess no, but we don't know for sure. But I'm going to guess no.
And I need to learn a little more about the lavatory situation, if you know what I mean.
I do.
Before I spend $6,000 on a flight for a dog. But it's interesting. It's actually a G5, a Gulfstream. So it's like flying private with your dog, and $6,000 to fly private's not too bad, I guess.
Right? I guess that with like other people. Apparently, I'm trying to find how many seats they sell. So
15 dogs plus their humans. I guess 1 human per dog. I don't know.
Yeah, there we go. But they say that they never sell more than 10 tickets per flight. Also, kids aren't allowed. So maybe you could just. It's basically flying private without a kid and with your dog. So I guess for some people, you're right. For $6,000, that's not that bad. That's like less than a business class ticket to Europe.
You'll recall Barbarians at the Gate, the story that the CEO used to fly his German Shepherd around by himself.
Right.
Remember?
That's right. That's right. I'm in. I don't know if anyone wants to fly with my dog. My dog's a loudmouth.
I don't know. For $6,000, I think your dog gets to be really annoying.
Yeah.
And probably gets to, go to the bathroom on everything. But that's a really good question, because if it's 4 dogs, do they have a rest area on the plane?
I need some more information.
This is actually a critical point. There you go.
Fire hydrants scattered throughout the cabin.
Bark Air. Check it out. $6,000. All right. Coming up, we are going to talk to Phil Orlando. We're going to get the breakdown of this market.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney.
The real outperformance has been the U.S. corporate high yield.
Are the companies lean enough? Have they trimmed all the fat?
The semiconductor business is a really cyclical business.
Breaking market headlines and corporate news from across the globe.
Do investors like the M&A that we've seen?
These are 2 big-time blue-chip companies.
The window between the peak and cut changing super fast.
Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Friday, everybody. Happy Friday before Memorial Day weekend. Happy countdown to wearing white pants and white shoes on Tuesday. I'm Alex Steele alongside Mike Regan. Paul Sweeney is off today. Coming up, we got a lot to talk about. The markets aren't doing anything, but they could do something. We have jobs data out June 7th. But until then, kind of how do you need to approach the market? Phil Orlando is Chief Equity Market Strategist and Head of Client Portfolio Management over at Federated Hermes. Also, it's Friday, so it is Munis in Focus. Bam. We're going to talk about that with Eric Kazatsky of Bloomberg Intelligence. And 4 years ago today is the anniversary of George Floyd's murder. We're going to speak to Mark Morial, the CEO of National Urban League. We're going to get more details on sort of the outlook, particularly in an election year, of where we are. In the meantime, let's go to John Tucker for Business Flash. Hey, John.
All right, Alex and Mike, this Bloomberg Business Flash is being brought to you by Commonwealth, supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with the solutions they need to grow a thriving business. Commonwealth. Go where you grow. Visit commonwealth.com to learn more. Major stock averages higher right now. Trading volume pretty muted. NVIDIA shares, they're adding to their record close. And shares of NVIDIA right now 1% higher, 1,048 per share. Worst performing stock in the S&P 500, that belongs to Intuit. It reported losing 1 million customers who use TurboTax service for free, so that is stoking concerns about demand for that software. Robert Pulaski at TPW Investment, meantime, remains bullish as stocks. He says the artificial intelligence story is here to stay.
We are believers that every company, every government in the world is going to have to participate in the AI age. And it's either you participate or you lose. And it's that simple.
And right now, the best performing stock in the S&P 500 belongs to Deckers Outdoor Corporation. They're up 12.5% after their earnings report. This is the maker of Uggs. The S&P 500 right at 5,300, up 0.6% right now. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, 69 points higher. That's up 0.2%. We're at 39,134. The NASDAQ 100 is 175 points higher. That is up about 0.9%. And yields right now pretty much unchanged. 2-year at 493, the 10-year 447. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Mike and Alex.
All right, thank you so much, John Tucker. We've established that John Tucker does not own or wear white pants or white shorts, but he will be in a bathing suit this weekend, correct?
What color is the bathing suit?
I have no idea. I think it's green. Well, it was green last year.
Okay, so maybe it's going to be green again.
No, but I left it in the... Never mind. It's the same bathing suit.
Gotcha.
It may have changed colors because it fell behind the washing machine.
Oh, excellent.
All right, time for a new one, John. Come on.
Maybe you need another one. Yeah. And when are you moving things into the beach house? Is that this weekend?
Already did it. Did it this
okay.
week. Yeah. So we're all set to go.
All right.
And the invitation is out to everybody. Everybody within the sound of my voice.
All right, give us that address, John. We'll all be
I actually
there.
know where it is. I could definitely show up and then call you and you'd be like, this is weird. Anyway, Mike Regan, do you have nice plans? Are you going to be barbecuing?
Mine are sort of the couch and TV, as Michael Barr.
So you're on the Michael Barr plan?
I'm on the Michael Barr vacation plan, yeah. Might go crazy and hit Home Depot. I don't know. Don't know if I'll have time.
little bit shopping, a little bit couch time. It kind of describes what I want my weekend to be also.
It's a perfect weekend, really.
It is, right? And let's be honest, volume is so light. We know that half of you listening are probably in your car having your vacation started already. One person who has still not started his vacation is Vince Signorella. He's back with us. Bloomberg macro strategist joins us. We established last hour that Vince is doing a filet mignon barbecue at his brother-in-law or your brother's?
Yes, my brother-in-law.
Your brother-in-law, okay. And he'll have an adult cocktail, but he will not himself be barbecuing, so that's important.
No.
We also learned that you are interested in the GDP data next week, but second read, no one usually really cares about that. Where do you think we're going to see the most market action?
I think it's going to come from personal income and personal spending. We're also going to get the PCE data, which is obviously a big one that everybody's going to be looking at. On the back of slightly less inflationary data from Michigan today, that sentiment index, I think markets would like to see that confirmed by hard data next week from PCE. We did get, again, a 0.1% decline in the CPI most recently. So bulls are going to be looking for sustained lower inflation. Although, I would caution realistically, all we've seen is 1 month. And we saw a 1 month decline in CPI last September, which was followed by, I think, about 4 or 5 months in a row of increases in CPI. So one number obviously doesn't a trend make. The Fed is in that category. And they would most certainly like to see some confirmation from PCE to confirm that maybe we're starting to see a bit of a pause or at least a slowdown in inflation.
All right, Vince, I'm going to assume you're on the hook to cook for July 4th, so we'll have to get back to you before that, see what the menu is. Vince always has a great menu. That's
nice call.
Yeah,
nice call. We're not invited there, though. Just John.
Yeah. It's funny how that works out, isn't it?
You're more than welcome. I mean, it's probably going to be a typical Italian barbecue with something like baked ziti.
That's what. That's awesome. Music to every Irish guy's ears.
Yeah.
No one eats more Italian food than Irish guys, I gotta say. Vince, I wanted to ask you about yields. We started the year really yields were crashing. 10-year yields rose about 100 basis points, topped out at about 4 3/4 last month. Is that it? Has the top been put in for yields this year, do you think?
I don't think so. I'm in the camp that inflation is a lot stickier than the Fed would like to recognize, the markets would like to recognize. I've been watching the Fed from my mandated junior year of college professor since 1978. I've never seen a Fed cut, except with the exception of the Volcker era when he finally turned inflation. The Fed doesn't cut when the economy is running hot, when inflation is sticky, when job growth is solid. There's no reason to cut. They're not going to want to add fuel to the fire. So all of these expectations, and Goldman 3 cuts this year, Morgan Stanley 3 cuts this year. I don't know if they're just trying to hit a home run and hopefully they're right and they look good. But from a fundamental standpoint, it makes absolutely no sense that the Fed would cut 2 to 3 times this year. They really are going to be sitting back. I think people forget the credibility issue. They're certainly not going to be wanting to be tagged with having to fuel inflation by cutting rates the way they missed the transitory inflation of the pandemic. So it's going to be in their best interest to sit back and watch higher for longer. And, we had Adam Posen the other day say the first situation for the Fed, or the first move for the Fed, is probably more likely a rate hike in 2025. It's not out of the question. I mean, it depends on how economic activity runs and inflation runs. It's just as much a possibility as a rate cut as this year.
That would be huge. I'm wondering, though, positioning has really changed since the beginning of the year, and we were looking at like 7 rate cuts, as what Mike was just saying. Where are we in terms of, say, positioning in whatever market you want to focus on, whether it's the dollar, whether it's bonds? How are we shaking out?
So if you want to look at equities and bonds, I think the momentum is still for lower yields, higher stocks. I mean, when you see the momentum that carried through the month of May, all bad news was overlooked. When you looked at all of the PMI data, everything that would push inflation higher expectations for the Fed to be on hold for longer within 24 hours was ignored, and the markets traded higher, and we're making more record highs. We're seeing some solid price action this morning. S&P cash back above 5,300. I think this is a feel that maybe it was a little oversold yesterday, or a little bit of taking back some of that positioning ahead of a long weekend. Call it what you will, but the positioning feels, and it's the same for the dollar. Dollar's a little bit lower today. The positioning in the momentum in the market wants equities higher. They want yields lower. They want the dollar lower. Question is, will they get that is another story.
All right, Vince, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. Vince is Signorello, Bloomberg macro strategist. Now we release him to go get to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, right? Pennsylvania?
Somewhere in Pennsylvania, yeah.
With the filet mignon on the barbecue. All right, Vince, thanks a lot. We really appreciate it. Joining us now, Phil Orlando. He's Chief Equity Market Strategist and Head of Client Portfolio Management at Federated Hermes. He's joining us now from Chappaqua, New York. Are you barbecuing this weekend, Phil?
So Ken and Rhonda invited us to a barbecue tomorrow, but I will open the grill on Sunday and Monday. So I'll do 2 of the 3 days myself.
Okay, and what are we barbecuing?
We span the gamut. It could be filet mignons, they could be shrimp, it could be burgers and doggies. Nice. The list is wide.
I think Phil's in the lead of the guests so far, whose house I'm going to invite myself over to.
Okay, so you're going to go to Phil's. I still think I'm going to go to Tucker's Beach Club, but we'll see. Yeah. We have another hour, so we'll see how this goes. Hey, Phil, we were talking to Vince in terms of what the Fed's going to do, et cetera. We're looking at. He's saying maybe no cuts at all this year. Goldman Sachs pushing off their cut call to September from July today. You also have Williams speaking for the 47th time today, talking about how the neutral rate might actually be higher, and that the kind of fiscal discipline that we don't have in the U.S. will weigh on Treasury yields, et cetera. Where do you stand?
We're kind of along those lines. That when the consensus view at the beginning of the year was 7 cuts this year, because of immaculate disinflation and spawning an immaculate pivot, that made 0 sense to us. Where we are right now is 1 or 2 cuts after the election, so November 7th or December 18th. Inflation, in our view, is much stickier and much more persistent than the market would like to see. The labor market, based upon the claims data we've seen, is still pretty healthy. So we think the Fed is going to stay on pause for a lot longer than the consensus view is, and hope, go to church and light some candles, hoping that inflation comes down. Part of the problem is that as the base effects are rolling off on the inflation calculations, the new data that's replacing it is taking inflation higher. Electricity costs, housing costs, food, labor, all of those inputs are higher than the market, I think, believes. And as a result, we've seen, CPI inflation moving up over the last 3 or 4 months rather than down.
Phil, it's always enlightening to read your thoughts on the market. And I was reading your recent note, and one phrase really popped out at me. I was hoping you could unpack it a little bit for me. You write, abundance of optimism. And I was talking to Ben Emmons about this earlier. We've seen this insane rally in meme stocks coming back. Crypto, the real sort of frothy, most speculative corners of the market are just on fire this year. And here we all thought that was sort of, when we saw that in 2020, we thought it was just a low interest rate, excess savings type of phenomenon. I mean, were we wrong about that being the driver then, or not? And what is the driver of this now, given the rate environment we're in?
In a word, AI FOMO. The associated with, the performance of the Mag 7 and the divergence in the performance with the forgotten 493. You look at what stocks have done just so far this year. We're up 11%, all right, all-time record highs. And from the bottom of the market last October, stocks are up 30%. Yet, you look at what the bond market's doing, bond yields, benchmark 10s, have backed up from 380 to, let's call it 450. Over the course of the last, 4 or 5 months. We think yields could touch a little higher. Maybe they go back and retest 475. Maybe they go back and retest the 5% level we saw last fall. In our view, that would be the top. But here's the thing. If you've got a benchmark 10-year Treasury yield at 5%, the comparable price earnings ratio on stocks would be about 17 times earnings. We're sitting here at about 21 times earnings. So in our view, the bond market has it right in terms of being cautious, being careful. The equity investors, in our view, are whistling past the graveyard. At some point during the summer, maybe it's the second quarter related to uncertainty regarding Fed policy. Maybe it's the third quarter relating to pricing in concern or confusion regarding the election in November. But we think there's got to be a consolidation, a correction, 5 to 10% or so over the summer months, which frankly we think would be very healthy.
I mean, I gotta say, Phil, though, I've been hearing that for years. So what's to prevent the buy the dip?
There's nothing to prevent the buy the dip. And if you give me the benefit of rolling out past the election, we think there's going to be a very powerful end of year rally, you know, sigh of relief, elections behind us. We've got some certainty on who's going to be running Washington and what fiscal policy is going to be looking like in 25. So perhaps, Alex, to your point, the market is not giving back that 5 or 10% now because it's looking through the election and saying, all right, things are going to be fine a year from now. I'm not going to be tempted to take a near-term correction here. I'm just going to stay the course. And perhaps that's the reason why we're not going to get the correction over the summer.
Now, Phil, you point out that retail sales were weak in April. Now, Alex, it's prom season for my daughters, so you cannot pin that on me. That my household is not responsible personally for the weak April sales.
It's fair.
But Phil, I think in this inflationary high rate environment, a lot of people are looking for signs of that consumer starting to crack, that sort of relentless buying power of the consumer that we've seen over the last few years. You know, are we starting to see that? I mean, or is this just a 1 month thing? Where do you think about?
We think we are, that the combination of the savings rates coming down, the utilization of credit cards coming down, the rate of defaults on credit cards have doubled over the last 2 years, and all of that excess personal savings that the government, you know, pumped up our bank accounts with a couple of years ago is virtually depleted, will be depleted by the end of this quarter. As a result, we're seeing some stress in the lower half of the economic spectrum, if you will, from a retail sales standpoint. Now, remember, retail sales, personal consumption accounts for 70% of GDP. If that's right, if the consumer continues to sort of retract a little bit over the course of the balance of this year, that's going to have a bearing on GDP. It's already starting to happen. GDP in the third quarter of last year, 4.9%.
Yeah.
In the fourth quarter of last year, 3.4. The first quarter flash was 1.6. And when you talked to Vince before, we get the revision next week.
Yeah.
Consensus has that revision coming down to 1.2.
Yeah.
So the economy is starting to slow, and I think the consumer is a large part of that.
Yeah, Phil, we got to leave it there. Up against the clock, Phil Orlando, Chief Equity Market Strategist and Head of Client Portfolio Management at Federated Hermes. Good luck with the barbecue. We appreciate that. Coming up, we're going to talk about munis because it's Friday. Eric Zaski of Bloomberg Intelligence will be joining us for our BAM Muni segment. Taking a look at the market here, though, you got that UMISH sentiment and you had growth pick up, inflation come down, and equities are on the rise. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the newsroom. This Bloomberg Business Flash being brought to you by BNY Mellon's Insight. 3 days of countless opportunities to expand your knowledge and put your practice at the forefront of the wealth management industry. June 4th through the 6th in Nashville, Tennessee. Visit insight.bnymellon.com. Major stock averages higher, but trading pretty muted today. NVIDIA shares, they're adding to their record close from yesterday. Shares of NVIDIA right now up 0.8%. And Workday shares dropping the most in more than 4 years. The software company cutting its full-year forecast for subscription revenue. They say customers being more cautious with their orders. Those shares down just about 13%. Did get some economic data today. University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Index remaining depressed. The labor market outlook a key concern. However, a lot of consumers actually tempering their inflation expectations. And Bloomberg's Pat Clark has been writing about this. A billionaire Barry Sternlicht's Starwood Real Estate Investment Trust taking the drastic steps of further tightening limits on shareholders' ability to pull money. It's an effort to preserve liquidity and stave off asset sales. S&P 500 right now up 41 points, a rise of 0.8%, 5309 at the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average now up 122 points. That's up 0.3%. The Nasdaq 100 217 points higher. That's up 1.2%. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash.
Now on Bloomberg Intelligence, Munis in Focus.
That's right. Our Munis in Focus segment. Build America Mutual insures U.S. municipal bonds that finance essential American infrastructure and provides guaranteed income to improve any portfolio. Be part of building America. Invest in BAM insured bonds. I'm Alex Steele alongside Mike Regan. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you everything you need to know through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence analysts that cover 2,000 companies and 130 industries worldwide. And one of those industries is, guess what? Munis. Eric Zaski, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Municipal Bond Strategist, joins us now from Princeton, New Jersey in our offices. Eric, thanks for joining us. Are you barbecuing this weekend?
I'm planning on it, and the weather looks like it's going to be nice. So, yeah, it's definitely on the agenda.
What are you barbecuing?
Oh, you know what? The kids like hot dogs and burgers. It doesn't have to be much more complicated than that. Yeah. Whatever makes them happy.
Alex is trying to line up an invitation, so she's
Yeah.
going to every guest asking what they're doing, trying to find the best one.
I don't know if burgers and dogs is going to do it, though.
I think that Eric is on our lowest at this point.
Yeah,
I mean,
so no offense, yeah.
But there was like filet mignon, there was a beach club. Basically, my plans got messed up this weekend, so I'm trying to figure out what that backup is. Eric,
I'm just glad the kids aren't doing chicken fingers. That's all.
Fair enough. All right, Eric, you're the Muni guy. How are Munis doing this week? What has stood out to you this week?
Yeah, I mean, this week has just been one that's really been marked by a backup in rates. You know, we talked a little bit in our last conversation just about how well they've done this year from a performance standpoint, and we're still in, having that outperformance versus treasuries, right? So still a good story to tell investors, but, it sort of cuts both ways, right? We've had about a 30 basis point backup in muni rates, really not great from a return standpoint, but for people who are deploying cash into this summer season, which is really marked by better performance, you have cheaper entry points. So it's not necessarily a bad thing that's going on.
Eric, I know you like to look at the market sort of from the 30,000-foot view, the macro view, but there is one issue I have to bring up with you. My favorite story in Muniland of all time is Graceland.
Yes.
Somehow Elvis's old house became a Muni bond. It's mind-boggling. How did that happen, and what's going on with that?
Yeah, so the museum corporation, which helps with the tourism down there, they did sell some tax-exempt bonds, I would say like 5 years ago, and they actually were just in the news, and I thought it was interesting because I was trying to figure out if there was actually like a muni bond angle to it, that Graceland was literally set to go into foreclosure, but I think a white knight came in at the last minute and helped sort of, save that museum, help save the house, and I think Elvis's granddaughter was involved to some degree, trying to sort of get that going and save it from going into receivership. So, no danger just now.
Amazing.
So this was your question you didn't want to share with me?
I was told I got a great question, but I don't want to.
He wasn't sharing because Mike and I are both very insecure about our muni knowledge. So he was really like holding that question. So he would have something to say. All right. So we saw rates back up. That happened in the muni market. Okay. Put it in perspective. So if munis are really cheap, do I buy them now? Where do I buy them? How does it look?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, we look at things from a ratio standpoint. What is the percentage of the muni ratio to treasuries? And, look, on a whole basis, we'd like to see that average near 100%. We're just in a different world than we were pre-COVID. So anytime we have a move from, 61 to 68%, that's meaningful cheapening in today's market. So as we said, if you take that advantage, the back up in rates, and you know that the summer is going to be one that's going to have positive tailwinds to performance, now would be a good time to be buying.
Eric, what's interesting is a lot of times when you talk to investors, they could dissect the stock market upside down, commodities market, bond market. But when you start talking about the tax implications of investments, that's where everyone's knowledge sort of reaches its limit. And obviously the key attraction in the non-taxable muni market is they aren't taxed at the traditional rates. Talk to us a little bit about what that means to an investor. How much more juice out of your investment do you get because of that over the longer term?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I feel like is left out of the conversation a lot, right? So you're bringing up a great point. We like to look at the world as far as the after-tax yield, right? The tax equivalent yield. What are these munis yielding? What would be the equivalent if I was going to pay tax on the full freight of that bond? And so if you sort of whack the muni rate up, and let's say you're in the highest tax bracket, you're picking up like 200 basis points over like-rated corporates. Wow. And, we've talked about this on a lot of different conversations, right? A AA muni does not have the same risk default prospects as a AA corporate or single A muni versus a single A corporate. So, on a dollar per risk basis, you're much better off with the muni option. Now, obviously, as you slide down the bracket scale and you get to where banks and corporations are paying that 21% level, the advantage flips, right? You're better off in corporates. But, predominantly the muni world is still high net worth, still a retail oriented market. So, we're quite comfortable in saying that there's still an advantage to the muni purchases right now.
Yeah, Paul Sweeney loves him as the munis. He loves munis. He loves them. What were some fun new issuers that happened today? What were some issuance that was exciting?
Nothing really today on a Friday, but some things
in
in the market. Some things in the market that, Joe's been talking about specifically there's been a lot of small stadium deals that have come to market. And we had a conversation about this last week. He's like, why do you think all these small stadium deals are coming right now? I was like, look, they're trying to break up Live Nation, right? The cost of a family to go to a ballpark or go to a concert is so expensive. So, I think there's a thinking on a lot of local levels that if they can redo their local small single A ballparks, they could draw those family crowds in who are looking not to spend as much money, and they're going to see attendance rise. And we've seen a lot of those deals, get in the pipeline to come to market over the next month or so.
That's pretty fascinating, Eric. I think because the last time we talked, issuance had been pretty weak this year. At least it had been earlier this year. And I wonder why that is. I mean, obviously the high rates probably play a big part of that. But I wonder if there's sort of a political backlash on the local level to towns and school boards and whoever else taking on more debt. Is that part of it, and is sort of floating a muni for something exciting like a stadium an easier sell politically?
It's really not an easier sell politically, right? I mean, those sort of deals, I would say, are more on the speculative side of things, and they sort of rely on the revenues of people coming into the stadium to pay those bonds. I think like you're sort of more alluding to, or what's going on the tax-backed, area of the market, right? Things that go to voter referendum. And we definitely did see a downtick on voters going into the poll booth and approving bond ballots, right? They're being mindful of how much they're actually trying to tax themselves, year after year, and what the debt levels of their localities are. So I think we are seeing a little bit of that pushback. But, thankfully for our market, supply has increased, and we're now about 40% year over year. I think a lot of that really has to do with some uncertainty with the election, right? No one knows what the tax regime is going to be like after November. So I think you're seeing a lot of issuers rush to market right now. I just don't know if we keep up that sort of pace for the second half of this year.
So they're kind of just getting ahead of it. Are there implications for the market, though, for the election, that you could see a flood of issuance after? Like, could there be some breaks that help?
You know what? I think if we get, and just assuming that we have the presumptive nominees that we have now, if we have a Trump, win in the office, we have the same tax regime as we're dealing with right now. If we see a Biden re-election, we could have tax increases into the trillions, right? And that, from my market, is going to really, really set a fire on the demand side. And hopefully you see issuers respond to that and say, okay, we want to meet this rising demand in the marketplace and, sort of finance other projects that have been sort of sitting on the sidelines thus far.
So to recap, Alex, for the macro guys like Vince, it's filet mignon on the grill this weekend. Equities guys like Phil, it's diversified. It's kind of like a diversified portfolio.
Shrimp on there.
It's just some shrimp, Eric's a low-key beauty guy. Burgers and dogs, is that the way?
Pretty much, yeah.
I absolutely love this. I love that you just had a thread there, and I'm going to steal it. I'm going to use it all day. So the macro strategist, like the former FX trader filet mignon, diversified for equities, and then boring for munis. But we still like you, Eric, and we don't think munis are boring.
I appreciate that.
It depends on what kind of hot dogs, I got to say. Ballparks, what are we talking?
Yeah, definitely the all beef ballparks. Yeah.
Okay, so this confirms your point.
Yeah,
a little bit. Okay, Eric, thanks a lot. We appreciate it. Happy weekend. Thanks for joining us. Eric Kazatsky, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Municipal Bond Strategist, joining us there to dissect the market. Wait, you're not barbecuing.
I mean, I haven't gotten an invitation yet, so I guess I'm probably gonna have to barbecue myself. I might do some chicken wings. I like a good.
Okay, so reporters, editors, team leaders, they like chicken wings.
Low key, the low budget, the lower tax bracket.
Excellent.
In our house.
I really like what we're doing here. I feel like there's an index. I feel like this is meaningful.
This should be, yeah.
I feel like we're definitely doing something right now. The market's not doing that much. I gotta say, yes, they're higher, but volume is super, super light. Tomorrow, though, marks the 4-year anniversary of George Floyd's murder. We're going to be discussing that and sort of the state of D&I right now within the corporate world. We're also going to go to Michael Barr with World and National News.
Thank you very much, Alex, Mike, John. Federal weather forecasters and emergency preparedness officials are out with their springtime look at the approaching Atlantic hurricane season. It is expected to be a busy one. Perhaps the busiest, says NOAA Administrator Rick Spinrad.
The forecast for named storms, hurricanes, and major hurricanes is the highest NOAA has ever issued,
with as many as 25 named storms and up to 7 major hurricanes. 2023 was the 4th most active Atlantic hurricane season with 20 named storms. The summer travel season is kicking off with airlines balancing consumer demand with ongoing fleet changes. A Bloomberg analysis found U.S. airlines are adding seats at the slowest pace since the pandemic. Helene Becker with TD Cowen says expect long lines and allow for the weather.
And I say this every summer because of thunderstorms and because you never really know when they're going to pop up. If you can take the earliest flight of the day, that is your best bet.
Helene Becker with TD Cowen expects travel demand to remain strong for the entire summer. Meanwhile, as the beach season kicks off, officials on the East Coast are using drones to keep swimmers safe from possible sharks after an increase in sightings last year. Experts say the likelihood of shark encounters is low, but cleaner water and the booming bait fish population could lure them into shallower water. Massachusetts fisheries biologist Greg Scommel.
The abundance of sharks will increase as we get into the warmer months. And the closer that sharks come to shore, the more likely they are to overlap with human activities.
The top United Nations court ordered Israel today to immediately halt its military offensive in the southern Gaza city of Rafah. Global news, 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Yeah, I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Some risk on sentiment after some Fed-friendly data today coming from the University of Michigan shows American consumers tempering their inflation expectations in late May. With slim volume, major stock averages are higher. NVIDIA heading toward a fresh all-time high today. And then you have Workday, that's tumbling, the software company cutting its subscription outlook. Those shares, they were down about 13%. Anika Gupta at Wisdom Tree, meantime, senses a degree of caution on the part of investors.
Well, essentially, clients are a bit nervous because obviously markets are at all-time high. Equity markets are at all-time high. I think they're essentially, obviously, this is a tricky month. You know, we're well versed with the famous acronym sell in May and go away. But nobody wants to sell. They want to stay invested, but they don't want to increase their positions. That's what we're essentially hearing.
S&P 500, 34 points higher, up 0.7%. We're at 5302. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 81 points, a rise of 0.2%. That's at 39,148. And the NASDAQ 100, 200 points higher. That's a 1% pop there, 18,823. And yields pretty much unchanged. This is an important one because when we come back next week from the holiday, the so-called T1, T+1 rule is going to come into effect. So stocks are going to settle in one day instead of two. I still go back to T+3.
Yeah, you're old school, man. That's
true. Yeah.
But the T+1 is really interesting because you're going to have to say, how do you staff for it? Like, what if I can't get my money in one day? Like, literally, I can't get it.
All sorts of implications for firms and individuals who work in the industry. But, you know, for the investor, and that's who it's all about, the individual investor, it's a good thing to be able to settle in one day.
All right. Thank you so much, John Tucker. I'm Alex Steele alongside Mike Regan. Paul Sweeney is off today. So as of tomorrow, it will mark the 4th year anniversary of George Floyd's death, a 46-year-old black American man that was murdered in Minneapolis by Derek Chauvin, a 44-year-old white police officer. Just to remind you, Floyd had been arrested after a store clerk alleged that he made a purchase using a counterfeit $20 bill, and his death sparked numerous protests across the country on race relations between African-American community and law enforcement and the excessive use of force by the police. And soon after George Floyd's murder, Minneapolis declared several changes like bans on chokehold, neck restraints, and other requirements that police tried to de-escalate and avoid using improper force. It's worth taking a moment to check in then on where we are 4 years later. Mark Morial is CEO of National Urban League. National Urban League is a nonpartisan historic civil rights organization based in New York City that advocates on behalf of economic and social justice for African Americans and against racial discrimination in the United States. Mark, it's a true pleasure. Thank you for joining us on this Friday.
Thank you for having me.
What we saw 4 years ago was a true awakening in the United States on race relations. Where is that awakening now?
So thanks for having me. So a couple of quick things. We saw in the wake of George Floyd's tragic murder, an uprising, an awakening, a consciousness in this nation. And I believe that that consciousness is still strong. I believe that the intentionality of many to overcome the legacy of racial justice and build an America for everyone in the future is still strong. But I would be less than candid if I did not say that now what has emerged is an orchestrated backlash movement. It manifests itself in attacks on voting through voter suppression. It manifests itself in attacks on African American and LGBTQ history through book bans and alterations of curriculum, politicians interfering in what takes place in schools. It manifests itself in the new attack on corporate and university DE&I. But I have to tell you, the will, the determination, the fight by many of us, and I think I say for the majority of the American people, to continue to push towards a more just future remains extremely strong. The only other point I would add is that in the case of George Floyd, the offending officer, the accused officer who is now a convicted felon, Derek Chauvin, was convicted in both the state and federal courts. And in that case, justice was done and someone was held accountable for George Floyd's murder. But the need in this country for a national police accountability measure, we called it the George Floyd Justice and Policing Measure, is still elusive. It didn't get through the Congress because of the filibuster in the Senate. But the will and the support and the intention and the work that we're going to do, it was reintroduced yesterday in the House, remains strong. We will not give up.
Mark, speaking of that backlash that you're talking about, obviously it's campaign season in the U.S. Right now. Donald Trump gave a rally in the Bronx borough of New York last night, and he said, quote, "I'm going to indemnify all police officers and law enforcement officials throughout the U.S. to protect them from being destroyed by the radical left for taking strong actions on crime." Now, I can't quite wrap my head around whether he'd be able to actually do that or what that would look like. But I'm curious if you heard those remarks, what you think of them, and what you think his chances of being able to do that.
Let me say, they're reprehensible. No American, no public employee should be indemnified and not be accountable for wrongdoing. What will you do next? Indemnify all embezzlers? Indemnify all murderers? Indemnify all sexual offenders? This is Donald Trump making extreme promises. But what Americans should be aware of is that he has the, if you will, gall to say these sorts of things in an effort to animate voting, in an effort to appeal to his base. America is not, no one is above the law. So now he's saying, let's place law enforcement above the law, even when they indiscriminately take the life of an innocent American. Mm-hmm. No, the badge and basically a certificate to be a police officer should not place you above accountability, because no one should be placed above accountability. And I hope Americans recognize that that what he said is offensive. It certainly would be resisted, but I do not. Nothing Mr. Trump does, no extreme statements he does, surprises me anymore.
Yeah.
And Americans should be very aware of what that statement really means.
Mark, when you talk about D&I, particularly in the workplace here, what it seems like is that you said the backlash, and a calculated backlash. What I've anecdotally noticed is you wind up promoting people or hiring them, but then the voice isn't heard. And I'm wondering how we solve for that problem. Sorry, we have about a minute left, and that's a big ask in about a minute.
Look, leadership in companies have to work on including people, ensuring that their voices is heard. This is how people get, if you will, assignments, how they get appointed to internal committees within the workplace. Look, leadership can make a difference. I've led organizations now for most of my life. I lead a large institution today. Nationally, we have almost 3,000 employees. I ran a city that had some 15,000 employees. Leadership can set a tone that when I bring people in, I'm going to make sure they're included. I'm going to make sure their voices are heard and create that kind of tone and atmosphere. And there are companies that are bucking those sorts of trends, but you're right to point it out as one of what I call the continuing challenges. This is ongoing work.
Mark, we really appreciate it. It's an important message and it's important work, as you state, and we appreciate you checking in with us 4 years on. Mark Muriel, a CEO of National Urban League, on the 4th anniversary of George Floyd's death that is coming tomorrow on May 25th. All right, we're going to talk more about this market here. We have stocks rebounding as consumers revise their inflation path. We're going to break that down. We're going to take a look at some of the top stories as well. Banks are calling back some of their staff now full time. We're going to break down how Mike Regan feels about it. We know how Paul Sweeney feels about it. He hates it.
And he's out of the office.
And he's here. Oh, yeah, it's fun.
company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
And I'm John Tucker, the Bloomberg Newsroom. Look at some of the company stories we're following for you. Let's start with Eli Lilly. They're going to spend $5.3 billion to try and boost production of a key ingredient in their weight loss and diabetes shots after the treatment's explosive popularity led to shortages. This is the manufacturing investment which adds to existing plants and is the largest in the company's almost 150-year history. They're going to expand a site in Indiana that makes the active ingredient in Zepbound for weight loss and the diabetes blockbuster Mounjaro. Lilly's project, the latest high-profile example of a manufacturing renaissance underway in the U.S. Companies, particularly those involved in sensitive sectors like the healthcare industry, are bringing more of their processes back to American shores. They're trying to make supply chains shorter, more resilient, and less prone to disruptions from geopolitical tensions, we'll call it. A new OSHA memorandum focused on protecting workers from muscle strains and other ergonomic problems. It suggests that the safety agency is continuing to push its inspectors to closely examine employers' injury records. This memo comes as OSHA's national emphasis program to protect warehouse workers from musculoskeletal injuries begins its second year. The agency also continues to litigate cases accusing Amazon of endangering workers who are exposed to muscle and back strains from lifting and pulling all those packages. And the CWA said to begin talks for a labor peace agreement with Micron Technology. This would cover the chipmaker's $50 billion two-factory investment in New York. The project recently won funding from the 2022 CHIPS and Science Act. And that is a look at your company news for this Friday. I'm John Tucker, and you're not.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Friday, everybody. Happy Memorial Day weekend. I'm Alex Steele. Paul Sweeney is off today. Mike Regan sitting alongside next to me. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you all the top news in economics and finance through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence crew. They cover 2,000 companies in 130 industries worldwide. We also give you world and national news. For that, we go to Michael Barr. Michael?
Thank you very much, Alex. Mike, John, this Memorial Day weekend kicks off the start of the summer travel season. United Airlines Director of Operations for Newark Liberty Airport, John Wigand, says the airline is on track to set its own record this weekend.
Real busy over the weekend for United Airlines. We're going to carry ourselves over 3 million passengers over the weekend. Very excited about that. Today in Newark alone, we're going to move 56,000 passengers through. And for United today, we're going to set a new record, 562,000 plus passengers in our system today.
The TSA reported Thursday was the second busiest day in their history, with more than 2.8 million passing through TSA checkpoints. On this day, 2 years ago, an 18-year-old gunman opened fire at an elementary school in Uvalde, Texas, killing 19 children and 2 teachers. It was the deadliest shooting at a U.S. grade school since the attack at Sandy Hook in Connecticut almost a decade earlier. White House Deputy Director of the Office of Gun Violence Prevention, Stephanie Feldman, tells CBS the Biden administration is still working to combat gun violence.
We are making progress on this issue. I know it can sometimes feel hopeless, but because of President Biden's leadership and Vice President Harris's leadership, we can have hope, and we are working with states to drive progress.
It should be noted that Michael Bloomberg, the founder and majority owner of Bloomberg LP, the parent of Bloomberg Radio, is a donor to groups that support gun control, including Everytown for Gun Safety. Hunter Biden is due in court today for the final hearing before he's expected to stand trial on federal firearms charges in Delaware as his father's reelection campaign unfolds. President Joe Biden's son is charged with lying about his drug use in October of 2018 on a form to buy a gun that he kept for about 11 days in Delaware. He has acknowledged an addiction to crack cocaine during that period, but his lawyers have said he didn't break the law and the case is politically motivated. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Alex, Mike, John.
All right. Thank you so much, Michael Barr. Appreciate that. So here's an article that caught my eye. Citigroup, HSBC, and Barclays are ordering more staffers to report to company offices, get for it, 5 days a week. But that's not because they want their butts there. It's because regulatory changes are making it harder to work from home.
Yeah. Well, since I'm filling in for Sweeney, I'll give you what I think Sweeney's response would
for
be.
sure. Mm-hmm.
Five days a week.
Yes.
In my day, we went 7 days a week. These slackers.
That's actually pretty good. That's actually
And we
pretty
walked
good.
to work in waist-deep snow in our sneakers.
Driven by horse and buggy. HSBC says the shifting regulations affect about 530 staff in New York, although the banks do say that, look, a majority of staff can continue their hybrid schedules, which means working up to 2 days a week outside of the office. So this is a very small portion of those guys.
I mean, I'm a big work from home fan, but I do feel like bankers who are managing money and trading, I don't know. I can see a case.
Is this a compliance issue?
I think that's it, right?
Okay.
You know, how do you know if these guys, these people aren't, trading their client's account on one screen and trading something else?
Or also just you leave something up and go to the bathroom and then someone can see it. I mean,
there are a lot of risks there. So I kind of get it, as much as I hate to have to see people go back to work 5 days a week.
No, fair enough.
I think 4 should be the max. Can we evolve to 4-day?
I would love that. I'm on board. You know that, speaking of, there's literally no one here in the building today, so it might just be us 3, as John Tucker can attest to, so that definitely could be part of it. Maybe we do it this way. The guys who are going to be barbecuing filet mignon have to be in the office 5 days.
Yes.
Then the guys with the chicken wings, like Mike Regan, then we're looking at a hybrid schedule, which feels right.
It sounds like the perfect solution.
Right.
Really the only viable solution, I think.
And then the equity guys who are diversified, they do a little meat, they do a little shrimp on the grill. Maybe they can, maybe they do 3 in 2 days or something like that. Anyway, guys, have a great weekend. Happy Memorial Day. Balance of Power up next.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
The United Nations top court orders Israel to halt military operations in Rafah now. Welcome to the fastest show in politics as the International Court of Justice makes its ruling and relief workers continue to struggle to get aid into Gaza. We're joined ahead by Hagar Susskind with Americans for Peace. We'll sit down with New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu the same week that Nikki Haley announced her intention to vote for Donald Trump, his view on the campaign trail, and later wine and diplomacy. My conversation with French ambassador to the U.S., Laurent Billy, who welcomes us to his wine cellar here in Washington. Something special on this Friday coming up. So let's get started right now, as always, with a look at Wall Street. And for that, of course, we turn to our friend in New York, Charlie Pellet. Hey, Charlie.
Thank you very much, Joe Matthew. We got stocks higher right now with the S&P 500 index back above 5,300. 5304, up by 0.7%. The Dow up 97 after yesterday's rout, up 0.2%. We've got NASDAQ right now up by 1%. 10-year, 4.47%, with a 2-year that's yielding 4.94%. Gold up $4.50 the ounce to $23.33, up by about 0.2%. West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.1%, $77.73 a barrel. Stocks climbed after data this morning showed U.S. consumers tempered inflation expectations in late May, which bodes well for prospects of Federal Reserve rate cuts. As for those potential cuts and the overall rate environment, Alberto Gallo is Chief Investment Officer at Andromeda Capital Management in London.
I think here the trade is for next year. Yes, we might have one cut this year. Our forecast is still for 0. But the reality is there's still a lot of cuts that are priced in for 2025. And I think that is wrong, especially with the outlook that we have for elections. We're going to have a lot of fiscal stimulus next year, regardless of who wins.
Andromeda's Alberto Gallo interviewed on Bloomberg Television. Keeping an eye on Workday shares after last night's earnings report, this stock is plunging. Workday down now by 13.4%. The software company cut its full-year forecast for subscription revenue. Also moving lower, Intuit shares. It is down now by almost 8%. It did report revenue that exceeded estimates, but still shares lower on investor concerns about a loss in the number of people who use the company's TurboTax service for free. Recapping, S&P up 0.7%. Balance of power continues now. Back we go to Washington, and once again, your host, here is Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie, we do thank you. I hope you're looking forward to a long weekend wherever you're joining us here on the radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube. This is Balance of Power, the Friday edition. Doesn't it feel good to say that? And I'll tell you what, Washington has already cleared out. My 90-minute commute on Tuesday, same exact drive, took me 19 minutes today, which gives you a sense of where we are here inside the bubble. Good luck finding anyone. But you can find a table at the restaurant of your choice. So good luck if you're a weekend warrior here heading out on the roads or the airlines. By God, it's going to be an interesting one as the candidates try to put themselves in the best position they can on this holiday weekend. Donald Trump in the Bronx last night. What do we think of this? The headline in the New York Times: at a Trump rally in the Bronx, chants of "build that wall." And great color from the scene in front of him, a more diverse crowd, as I read, than typical of his rallies, with many black and Hispanic voters wearing MAGA hats in New York City last night. Donald Trump says he can win it. Most people don't think that is possible. We'll talk to it about it now with Gregory Cordy, who's, of course, always got his eyes on the campaign trail. Bloomberg News White House and politics reporter. Great to see you, Gregory. The Bronx, huh? Yeah. Felt like Friday last night for Donald Trump, I guess. He's not serious, right? Is he a contender in New York for starters? Is that in an alternate universe? Or?
He's talking a big game, but I will believe it the moment that the Trump campaign spends a dime on television advertising in the New York market.
Yeah.
It's a very expensive market to advertise in. It's a huge state. It's a tough state to win. It would be delusional to think that he could win it. But he's there for two reasons. One is that he's there anyway because he's on trial in New York. So he's on a pretty short leash. And while he's there, he's decided to make some lemonade out of the lemons that the Manhattan District Attorney has given him. And also because being in New York is a good foil for his audience, right? He can campaign against New York to the rest of the country, which is popular in a lot of parts of the country.
Clean up this mess in the city. He says we'll clean up the subways. Do you think he's ever been on the New York subway?
You would have to think in his entire life he would have had to, but
I've been looking for a photograph, Gregory. I can't find one. 70s, 80s, 90s.
Yeah.
Okay, so a couple of questions here then. That's New York. How about the demographics we saw at this rally last night? Are we to believe that Donald Trump, and we have polling on this, is in fact pulling black and Latino voters into the fold in this campaign and away from Joe Biden?
You know, that remains to be seen. Right now, if you look at the polling, he does seem to be making inroads. But remember that we're 6 months out. And what we see from, a lot of voters, not just black and Hispanic voters, but a lot of voters like to talk about being undecided. They like to tell pollsters they're keeping an open mind, and particularly among black voters who really want you to earn their vote year after year. A lot of them have been sitting on the sidelines, much higher numbers of undecided voters in that community. And that's what's been depressing Joe Biden's numbers there. But look, you have to give him credit. Trump himself is seeing numbers in the 20s among black voters, even higher among Hispanic voters, as the Hispanic population in this country begins to mature, right? Where you have first and second generation families now becoming third and fourth generation families as they become more integrated into parts of American society. And lose some of maybe that the Hispanic identity. That yes, they have becoming more Republican, and that is a generational thing. It's a long-term thing, and Trump is taking advantage of it.
It's a really interesting moment, and we're told that the commander-in-chief was sort of employing the powers of incumbency here with the state visit this week with the Kenyan president. It was interesting when you look at the guest list for that state dinner last night. To what extent was that messaging to the demographic we're describing?
You know, I'm not sure. It is, as we've been reporting, the first state dinner to honor an African head of state in 16 years.
Gregory.
Remarkable to me, looking back on it, I covered the Obama administration, that President Obama, who has ancestry in Kenya, would not have done this.
Of course, he, unlike Joe Biden, visited Africa, which is something that this president has promised to do.
Yes, and Africa always gets talked about, but almost as an afterthought in foreign policy. It's becoming increasingly important, as is much of the global South, with the rivalry with China, and we may be entering a new sort of soft Cold War here. But in terms of U.S. voters, domestic politics, look, there are a lot of constituencies, especially Democratic constituencies, who think that Joe Biden is maybe spending too much time on foreign policy. And he has had some foreign policy issues to deal with, not just China, but you talk about Israel and you talk about Ukraine. And given where we are with the inflation, given where we are with the economy, there is a strong feeling in many parts of even the Biden coalition that he needs to spend more time at home. And that's going to be challenging because he's about to go off to the G7 and France and Normandy. All very important parts of what a president does, but it's an election year, and that's why there's going to continue to be this tension here.
Gregory Cordy, thank you, as always, for stopping by reporting for Bloomberg from Washington. I'm Joe Matthew. This is Balance of Power, and I'm glad you're with us here on the radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube. It was at the bilateral news conference that Joe Biden held with the president of Kenya yesterday that the matter of Israel came up. We expected this would be the case. Of course, the Biden White House wanted to talk about investments in Kenya and throughout the continent, but reporters are going to ask what they want to ask about. And the matter of the ICC came up, these arrest warrants that we're understanding are being pursued for Israeli leaders, including Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu himself, right alongside leaders of Hamas. Joe Biden responding to a question about this yesterday in the East Room. Let's listen.
We made our position clear on the ICC. We don't recognize the jurisdiction of ICC the way it's being exercised, and it's that simple. We don't think there's an equivalence between what Israel did and what Hamas did.
Fast forward to news today, the UN's top court ordering Israel to immediately halt its military operations in Rafah, partially granting a request by South Africa in a case over genocide allegations. This is where we start our conversation with Hadar Susskind. He is now president and CEO of Americans for Peace, served as Sergeant First Class in the IDF. And it's great to have you back, Hadar. Your thoughts first on this latest development from the International Court of Justice, which I am sure, frankly, most Americans have never heard of. This is unenforceable, but it's an important message. How will Israel respond?
Well, Israeli political leaders, starting with Prime Minister Netanyahu, but going, frankly, all the way through the opposition, are, of course, opposed to this. They believe that, that the International Criminal Court, that the ICJ, that these institutions don't have jurisdiction and, frankly, don't have Israel's interests at heart. So that's the broad response of the Israeli government. I will say there is a range of different views within the Israeli population, and many of those believe that, these things are reflective of the politics, but in a way where we shouldn't look at them as scoring a goal for one team or the other. So it's not good, it's not bad. What it is a tragic reflection of the reality that Israelis and Palestinians find themselves in, of months and months and months of ongoing war that is, again, only tragic for both sides.
Well, as I mentioned, South Africa is alleging genocide. The language here becomes important. Israel, of course, denies that. How should this be described?
One of the things, and I apologize to going back to the same frame so often, but it continues to be true that so often folks on both sides are pushing to the extremes, using straw man arguments, using the most extreme language. So, whether this is genocide or not, whether that's, simply in all of Gaza and Rafah can be argued. I am not an international law expert to give a definition of that, but there's no question that it's horrific and there's no question that it's tragic. So it doesn't need to be genocide in order to be horrible and to be opposed. And likewise, I heard, in your earlier conversation, the questions coming up about, is there equivalency, or is the international court trying to create an equivalency between Hamas and the Israeli leadership, which again is a straw man argument. The international court has brought these charges against, or called for these warrants against both Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Gallant, and against Hamas leaders. They didn't say they're equivalent. They didn't say they did the same thing. Frankly, the charges are, many of them, different. So the equivalency argument is, again, just people falling back, trying to use these straw man arguments as opposed to really dealing with the facts. What's happening on the ground? Tens of thousands of people have been killed in Gaza. That's a fact. No one questions it. People still argue about the exact number and argue about how many are combatants, but there's no question that tens of thousands of people have died, that people are suffering from hunger, if not famine. Thousands and thousands of homes and buildings have been destroyed. It's horrific. And again, going back to the Hamas side, October 7th is unquestionably war crimes. They killed 1,200 people. They took hostages, civilians. So all of these things can be and should be strongly opposed without fighting over whether or not it is equivalent. It doesn't have to be equivalent to all be wrong.
Well, we get lost in the language here very often, lost in the jargon, for sure. And I'd like to talk to you more about what is happening on the ground. You're absolutely right. It's one thing that we specialize in here, and we waste a lot of time doing it. Hadar, one thing that has been accomplished is the construction of this temporary pier with tens of millions of dollars and a lot of effort by the U.S. military. It's barely being used, is what we understand. How would you describe the current state on the ground when it comes to delivering humanitarian aid?
Well, that is extremely problematic, for sure. The state of delivering aid overall. It changes very regularly with announcements by the Israeli government that they've opened or closed a specific crossing. Also, those announcements are not always met by reality on the ground. There actually have been a lot of questions as to whether any aid that has come in through this U.S.-funded pier has actually reached people in Gaza. It's unclear, but there have been claims both ways. What I think is clear is that it is just a reflection of how broken the politics is that this pier is necessary at all, right? It is not physically necessary to build this pier in order to bring in more aid. All that was necessary is opening the crossings. There's no question that bringing it in by truck through Israel, through the crossings in both the north and the south of Gaza is by far more effective. The U.S. did this, built this pier, spent, I think, hundreds of millions of dollars, not tens of millions, because they couldn't get the Israeli government to agree to open those crossings. And so this was a workaround. The fact that the U.S. government felt it necessary to work around the obstruction of Prime Minister Netanyahu, I think speaks for itself.
Speaks for itself. Where are we going to be a couple of weeks from now? Because the White House is trying to walk a line on Rafah, a red line, dare I say, as President Biden articulated a couple of weeks ago. The fact of the matter is we haven't seen the full-on invasion and occupation of Rafah that some expected. It's been referred to as a limited incursion and therefore not a violation of the red line. When you put your IDF hat back on, Hadar, what's going on in Rafah, and is this the extent to which we're going to see the military involved?
Well, I think if you look at reporting, limited though it is coming out of Rafah, people don't consider this a targeted invasion. Again, initially, the Israeli response was that they were not invading and certainly not occupying the city of Rafah, but rather just the crossing between Gaza and Egypt. They did that. They then did move forward. They have increasingly bombed and taken military further and further in. They are doing it in a slow, specific way. I mean, it's pretty clear. It's one of these, here's the line. Okay, is my toe over the line now? Okay, what about now? What about now? And again, President Biden said a full invasion of Rafah is a red line, but that hasn't been defined what exactly that means. And so that's what the dance is right now. Whether this will continue in this way, I don't know. I hope that what we're going to see is an end to this, an end to this war, which is what is in
I want you to
Israel's
come
interest.
back and talk to us as we feel our way through this, Hadar. I wish we had more time, as always. Hadar Susskind with Americans for Peace. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. We'll continue our conversation ahead with an eye on the campaign trail and Governor Chris Sununu. This is Bloomberg.
Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Stocks higher across the board ahead of a long holiday weekend. The S&P at 5307, up 40 right now, up 0.8%. The Dow up 113, up 0.3. We got NASDAQ up 1.1%. 10-year yield right now is at 4.46%, with a 2-year yielding 4.93%. Recapping a rebound from yesterday's sell-off. Stocks higher, S&P up 0.8. Balance of Power continues now. Once again, your host, Joe Matthew.
Thank you, Charlie Pellet, and welcome to the Friday edition of Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew. Just a couple days ago, Nikki Haley made big news here in Washington, announcing her intention to vote for Donald Trump. A lot of questions about whether that was in fact a real endorsement of the former president, as she did not tell her supporters to do the same. She, in fact, encouraged Donald Trump to work for their support, something I discussed yesterday in a wide-ranging conversation about the presidential campaign with the governor of New Hampshire, Chris Sununu, of course, an ardent supporter of Nikki Haley when she was on the campaign trail. Here's what he said.
People will say, well, if you're voting for them, are you endorsing them? Are you supporting them? Are you campaigning with them?
Is there a difference?
I think I would never speak for Nikki Haley, but like myself, we're going to vote for her. Obviously, we have a lot of complaints about Donald Trump, as a lot of folks do.
I know.
But elections are about choices. They really are. It's A or B. You don't have to be all or one. You don't have to be extreme one way or the other. But if you want democracy to work, you got to get out there and vote. And a lot of folks are saying, gee, we don't like the bombastic style of Trump. We don't like the chaos, but we need a change. We need results. We need somebody to do something about inflation, about the border. Those are the top issues. And I think Nikki did a great job kind of pointing that out, that, look, people care about issues. You have to talk about these issues. You can't just kind of say, we know you have record credit card debt, but ignore that. You're all fine. Bidenomics is working. It's not, right? And so we call that gaslighting, right? Basically not validating the reality that a lot of individuals are feeling right now. And if anything, that's where I think Biden has really kind of screwed this thing up.
Well, some would say as well,
it's telling people that it's working when it's clearly not.
Understood. Some would say as well, with Donald Trump's association with the economy that we see bearing out in the polls, that doesn't match with his record on the deficit, for instance, either, which I know is a big issue for you and a big issue for Nikki Haley. Yeah. Did you help her work through this? Did you arrive at this decision together?
No, I love Nikki. I think she's the best. I wanted, since she got out of the race, I wanted her to be nothing but happy, spending some time with her family. Her husband finally got home after nearly a year-long deployment, so I know she's spending a lot of time with him, and that's been wonderful. She came out and she had an event yesterday and was asked, and she said she was going to vote for Trump.
Yes.
But I think she also made a really critical point, which was there's still a lot of voters out there that have to be earned, and Trump has to do some work. He's got to do some work on the issues. He's got to do some work to make sure that all those folks that may not have voted for him in the primary on the Republican side are going to come home, and they're not going to do it just because. He's got to go earn them. But there's time for him to do that. Biden has a bigger challenge on his hands, I think, in that I think Biden's base has walked from him more than the Trump base has walked from Trump. I think independents are walking away from Biden. I think the younger voters that really should be all with Biden right now, a lot of them just won't vote. So Biden has his own set of chores in the next 6 months.
Well, that's clear, and it's bearing out in our own polling here at Bloomberg. And my God, the Trump base won't budge, even as he sits in criminal court. But she said more than, as you point out, more than just that she was going to vote for him. There was one particular line that stuck out to me. A loud part, she said, of each party wants us to abandon our allies, appease our enemies, and focus only on the problems we have at home. She said this worldview has already put America in great danger, and the threat is mounting by the day. That sounds like she's speaking to Donald Trump. Who's the audience there?
Well, so a couple things. When it comes to foreign policy, appreciating that you get world peace through America's strength, I think there's no one better in understanding those issues than Nikki Haley. So I think she's just spot on.
Is she worried about
those
this protectionist bent in the Republican Party?
It's not just the Republican Party. Look, when you look at folks that say international issues are the most important, it's about a 50-50 split. Those who think Trump portrays an image of strength that Biden doesn't portray. I think some of Biden's policies were more in line with where we should be, but he doesn't portray the strength. He's kind of gone back and forth on Israel, right? I'm a big supporter of Israel. Got to stand with him unquestionably. He was unquestionably with him on May 7th, and on May 8th, he's like, by the way, we're going to withhold weapons. So you can't have your foot half in and half out. Yeah. That kind of inconsistency is a problem for Biden. I think some of Trump's statements, quasi-supportive of Putin and calling him this smart guy and all of that sort of thing, that stuff scares people as well. So I think they both have a lot of problems on the international front.
Well, this is an interesting view to hear from you on both of these, because, it's supposed to be my job to try to make you turn into a pretzel to explain to me why you want to vote for Donald Trump or plan to vote for Donald Trump.
Of course.
After effectively mounting a strong campaign against him and helping Nikki Haley. You've already done that interview. I want to bring it back to the Snowshoe Club in Concord the night before the primary. And there was hope inside the barn that night that something different, that there was an alternative. And this person, Nikki Haley, had everybody talking as they were drinking by the fire and wondering what might happen the next day after you did a lot of work in the state for her. What happens to those old-line Reagan Republicans? What happens to the donors who followed Nikki Haley or the suburban women who support still, and by the way, some early primaries that we've seen, they're still showing up in primaries for Nikki Haley? Do they stay home? What do you tell them to?
I think the majority of them will come over and vote for Trump. But I think Nikki made a great point. There's still a lot of them that have to be earned, and I go back to that point. It's not that they can't be earned. Will the donor base come over to Trump? Probably not. Not like they had in the past. No? I don't think so. I think a lot of the significant Republican donor base is going to put their money into the Senate seats, the governorships, the congressional races, really trying to drive that home there. Trump has kind of co-opted a bit the RNC to be his kind of donor feeder system, but they've had some success. I don't think it's going to be like it was back in 2016 and even in 2020. The voters themselves, though, those are the ones that have to be spoken to, and there's plenty of time for Trump to do that if he wants to earn them on the Republican side. Like I said, I don't think there's any policy changes Biden could implement today to get an appreciable different result that would drive people back over to him. So Biden's in a tougher position right now. Where it goes with everyone's looking at the trials, right?
Sure.
I don't think the trials have an appreciable difference in this campaign.
What if there's a conviction? Does that feel different?
No. Look, I'll say this. Three things are going to happen. He's either innocent, and that's a big win for Trump because not only would he be off on this one, but he would then claim that all the others are politically motivated, and it would put a shadow of a doubt on all of them. Same with a hung jury. He probably gets the same result. A conviction, people say, yeah, well, I just don't think it's going to drive people away from him. And if you are driven away by that, I respect your right to say that that's a line too far if he's convicted.
Would it keep independents away from him?
No, I don't think so. Because independents...
They break Trump even with a conviction.
If they've already broken away from Biden, it's because they don't like the convictions, they don't like January 6th, they don't like election denial, but they are getting crushed by inflation. Inflation is the issue of the day. There's no question about it. And the border. Those are still remain to be the top two issues. And those are really bad when Biden doesn't do well with those at all.
Will you play a role at the Republican convention in Milwaukee? Will you have a message for delegates?
No, not really. No, look, at the convention, it's going to be a fait accompli. Trump's going to be the nominee. It'll be kind of Trumpville convention. If I go out there, maybe I'll go and do some.
But you're a unicorn in the Republican Party. Shouldn't he invite Chris Sununu?
I don't care. No, I've been invited. I don't know to speak. I don't know if they've settled all that, but I've been invited. I may go out, I may not. It really depends on the schedule. But if anything, it's a logistics nightmare.
You better believe it.
There's like a lot of traffic. You got to stay like an hour away. I think conventions are a big logistics mess.
Well, yeah, that's
headache.
Either way, that part's true.
It's kind of like going to the Super Bowl. I think I'd rather just watch it from home.
Donald Trump has found religion on early voting, which I find fascinating. He's encouraging people to embrace this now after demonizing it for years.
Yeah,
this requires a re-education, some would argue, of a Republican electorate who now think early voting is evil.
Yeah, I will say this. I don't like early voting either. I don't think Trump likes early voting, but I think the Republican Party is saying if the rules in your state allow for early voting, then get out and do early voting. Play by the rules. Don't just sit there and don't do absentee or don't do early voting. You got to play by the rules to make sure you're getting out the vote, because that's what this is all about.
Play the cards you
have.
have.
So I don't think any of us like early voting. I think there's a lot of problems with it. Yeah. But in the states where it's allowed, you better play by those rules, and Republicans better go out there and work hard at it.
We saw something very troubling in our latest Bloomberg swing state poll. It came out just yesterday. Half of the electorate in the swing states that are going to decide this election are fearing violence. They fear an outbreak of violence surrounding this election. The conventions we just mentioned, around the election itself, if it's undecided for days, people have shades of January 6th still, of course, in their memories. But it was equal shares. Democrats and Republicans had this same fear. What are governors like you going to have to do to keep this election
Well, let's understand why that is. You're seeing what's happening on college campuses right now, right? The protests, the violence, it's not peaceful protests. They think as long as it's in the name of social justice, it's okay to break the rules and break the law. It's not. It's absolutely not. We're a nation of laws, and you have to nip it. So as governors, for example, when we looked at what was happening in the universities, we were very proactive. We talked to them. We were transparent. What are the rules? What are the guidelines? Where will you make arrests? Hold folks accountable. If you kind of nip it in the bud early, you can really, make sure that it doesn't fester to something bigger. States that didn't handle it early, or university systems that didn't handle it early, bring in law enforcement, do the right thing. They're the ones that are suffering the most. On the other side of things, you have the election denial and all that sort of thing, the fears of January 6th. That's legitimate. We've seen it sprout up in January 6th, and so obviously there's concerns on the other side there. The one thing I try to encourage folks is to be optimistic. As all the election denial, guess what? Biden won the election, and he was deemed the winner. And there was a smooth transition of power post-January 6th, but on January 20th,
yes,
Biden slept at the White House, right? So it worked out. And so I've had folks say, yeah, but I was from Arizona, and they said my vote didn't count. But it did count. And even though they challenged it, the system worked, right? The institution stood strong through all those wins and all those pressures. Our institutions stood strong.
And you believe they will again?
I do. I believe in the institutions. Look, our institutions have stood strong through everything from civil wars, world wars, pandemics, 9/11, January 6th. They're tough times. They're big bumps in the road. But, man, our founding fathers really designed the system well and believe in it because it has worked up until now. And I'm very optimistic about, even though there may be bumps in the road and complaints on both sides or whatever might come, America's going to be okay. Sun's going to come up.
You love being in Washington. I know you want to stay here as long as you can. But when you're back home and you're walking down Elm Street in Manchester and you're talking to people, what is it that gives you hope? What are we missing here in the Capitol?
Look, I would say this. There's a lot of talk about democracy being eroded.
Yes.
And I go back to that. And if anything, I tell people, I'm not trying to tell you how to vote. You vote for Trump, vote for Trump. Vote for Biden, vote for Biden. Do whatever you want, but vote. Do not let anyone tell you, well, just don't vote. That's the most un-American thing you can do because so many people on this planet don't have the ability to vote and choose their leadership. And at the heart of it, you can't say democracy is being eroded. Democracy is being threatened, but I won't participate in democracy. That's crazy, right? Your vote is all that will decide who leads this country, who leads your school board, who leads in your governorships or your mayor. Your vote is everything to that process. So don't waste the opportunity to make sure your voice is heard. Your voice is valid. It has merit. I mean, we've had presidential elections, go back to 2000, that have come down to a couple hundred votes here or there. Right? You never know where it's going to be. In all of these toss-up states, as you pointed out, even New Hampshire now is a toss-up. Holy smokes, that hasn't happened in 20 years. It's always been Democrats on the presidential side have always won. They have this really awesome Republican governor, but the Democrats on the presidential side have won for quite a while. But again, you just don't know what's going to happen. So I think you're going to see a higher voter turnout than most people think. I think what gives me hope is that the institution stands strong, your vote does matter, and I have a lot of confidence that regardless of the outcome, we are going to have a peaceful transition of power.
The governor of New Hampshire, Chris Sununu, many thanks for sitting down with us and being so generous with his time. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. We're going to turn our attention to the campaign trail coming up and the Trump tax cuts on Bloomberg.
1240 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long at Bloomberg. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ very much in the green ahead of a long holiday weekend, and we are trading close to the best levels of the day. Right now, the S&P up 36. That is a gain of 0.7%, holding above 5,300 on the S&P at 5303. We've got the Dow up 79 now after yesterday's rout, up by 0.2%. NASDAQ up 175. For NASDAQ, the composite index up by 1%. Broad-based advance today with the Russell 2000 also higher by 1%. 10-year yield 4.46%. That 2-year 4.94%. Spot gold is up 0.2%, 23.35 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.1%. WTI 77.69 a barrel. The Commerce Department reports factory orders for durable goods advanced for a third month in April, led by business equipment. And with more, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
April's gains were broad-based across industrial sectors. Even with inflation, even with interest rates at 2-decade highs, the manufacturing data suggests many businesses are betting on the future. They're making long-term investments, not retrenching. They're seeking to enhance U.S. productivity and boost industrial capacity to keep up with the rest of the world. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
S&P 500 index on track for its fifth straight week of gains. That is the longest bullish streak since February. Again, the S&P today up 0.7%. Workday shares are plunging. We've got Workday now down by 14%, dropping the most in more than 4 months after the software company cut its full-year forecast for subscription revenue and said customers are being more cautious with orders. Subscription revenue is a key metric for Workday, which provides software for business tasks such as managing personnel. Again, Workday down by 14%. Also, after earnings last night, Intuit shares are lower. It reported tax season revenue that did exceed estimates as more customers opted for higher price features. Still, the shares are lower on investor concerns about a loss in the number of people who use the company's TurboTax service for free. Shares of Intuit down today by 8.1%. Some of the other company stories that we're following: Lucid Group going to be eliminating about 400 jobs in coming months. The latest move by an EV maker to cut costs in a dramatically slowing market for plug-in cars. Now, according to a regulatory filing, the reductions, which amount to about 6% of the automaker's workforce, will be complete by the end of the third quarter. And that is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Balance of Power continues now. Back we go to Washington. And once again, here's your host of Balance of Power, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you for being with us here on the Friday edition of Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio, on the satellite, and on Bloomberg TV. You can come and have a seat here as we're going to be talking about the effort to make permanent the Trump tax cuts of 2017. This is something we've spent some time talking about here on the broadcast because the debate is getting louder, and the prospect of Donald Trump winning this election in November, something that our Bloomberg News poll shows happening if the election were held today. This is getting very real. Lobbyist money is being spent now in Washington, and a debate is being had about what impact this would have on the economy. After all the talk of debt and deficits, this is something that we're going to have to address. Of course, a lot of people have pretty good feelings about the impact of the tax cuts when it is shown in headline form. When you look under the hood, things start to get a little bit different. And that's a big focus of this week's Big Take DC podcast. And I'm glad to say we're joined by Bloomberg's Sarah Holder to talk a little bit more about tax policy here and what this could mean if they are made permanent. Sarah, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us at the table today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So look, everybody remembers this going back to the first Trump term. If in fact the tax cuts are made permanent, what happens to our deficit?
Well, there is a lot of disagreement about what might happen to the deficit. Already we know that in 2017, those tax cuts that Trump promised did not pay for themselves as he said they would. And so there's questions about how they would pay for themselves this time.
Okay, that becomes a big problem when you're a lawmaker trying to make the argument here.
the first batch wasn't paid for. Why would this be?
I think that's what people are debating right now. You know, my colleague Saleha Mohsen talked with Bill Hoagland from the Bipartisan Tax Policy Center.
Yeah.
He talked about some of the disagreement that folks are having about whether that these tax cuts will be good for the country. You know, last time in 2017, not one Democrat voted for those tax cuts. So it'll be interesting to see what happens this time.
This is going to become a big issue on the campaign trail, I presume. But I have to admit, Sarah, getting people to find religion on deficits is kind of difficult when you're arguing about things like the border, about things like abortion policy in Israel. Is this going to see the light of day in this campaign?
I think that both Biden and Trump have talked about their visions for tax policy in this country, and they know that it's a key concern for voters. You know, Bloomberg did a poll. I think 77% of respondents said that they would support tax raises on billionaires, and so there is a lot of bipartisan support for something like that.
Great. Well, I appreciate your coming in to talk to us about it, because the podcast dropped last night, if I'm right.
Yes.
Thursday evenings.
Yes.
Big Take DC, Bloomberg, Sarah Holder. Look for the podcast on Apple, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. You can look for ours, too, here on Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington, and we've got a show on your phone every day around here, live from Washington for 2 hours, along with Kaylee Lyons, who's in the field today. She'll be back next week. With some of the other issues that we're covering today on the program, we're coming off an important state visit that's technically actually still underway. The president of Kenya, President Ruto, is in Washington today with Kamala Harris for a fireside chat that they're having on direct foreign investment in Africa. And of course, we saw international policy on the highest level here in Washington this week with the state visit of President William Ruto, and it culminated with a big state dinner last night at the White House. If you were in that part of town, you sure knew about it. Nothing is bigger in Washington, at least on that end of Pennsylvania Avenue, than a state dinner featuring a 5-star menu, world-class wines from California and Oregon. Barack Obama showed up. It was a who's who on the South Lawn, as you're seeing probably in your Twitter scroll this morning. But soft power, as they call it, is employed on a smaller scale here every day in Washington. Not every night can be a state dinner. And it's not only at the White House. It's something I discussed with France's ambassador to the U.S., Laurent Billy, who brought us inside the French ambassador's residence, and more specifically, inside the wine cellar at the residence, where soft power came with a glass of Bordeaux. Here's the ambassador. The idea of soft power is really something when we consider your work here in Washington and on the global stage. It's not lost on us that Emmanuel Macron was the first world leader that Joe Biden brought to Washington to celebrate in a state dinner. I know you arrived shortly after that. How important is face-to-face diplomacy? Forget the wine for a moment when you need to work with someone to achieve an end.
I think that COVID period has shown also how important the face-to-face meeting is. Because when you had a video conference, well, you get the impression that you really exchange. But then 3 months later, 6 months later, you have a new video conference, and then you realize that you are more or less at the same point that 6 months before. Because most of what is happening is not around an official table. It's on the side talk, when you can really enter, when you can share what are the reasons behind your position on some issue. And that doesn't work on video. That's really when people are really connecting and exchanging, it works.
Wine is not just a tonic for diplomacy. It's also big business. The most recent statistics that we have seen value French wine exports at more than $17 billion, much larger than what we see in California, for instance, here in the United States. Is there room for growth in an industry that's as old as humankind?
There is newcomers in the wine industry, so it's.
How about for France?
For us, we are kind of mature economy and mature market for the wine, and we have also strong rules to make sure that what we export is really the top quality. And so we can't, by example, expand
some grapes variety in an area which would be close to Champagne, but don't have exactly the same kind of soil, the same kind of climate. We will have to create a new wine, but not try to sell something with a fancy name which doesn't fit the quality. So I'll say we really focus on quality more than expanding more quantities.
You're a self-described introvert. Does wine help with that?
It can, but when I refer to that, I was also comparing myself with some of my predecessors who were known in DC as being more extrovert and to throw a party. So yes, it helps, and because wine is also about bringing people together, conviviality. I don't mean to get drunk, but just to offer something that you like, to share a moment of, about good food, about good wine, about life. And I like that. And I like the small format also, which are more intimate. That's probably where I'm more introvert, that I prefer to a big party, a dinner when we have more time to exchange, to deepen relation.
The wine that we're drinking here, again, brings us to an area of France where the wineries are very small. Each bottle of wine tells a story. There's a family behind it. There's usually a story of enormous effort and hard work that goes behind it. That's part of the story of French culture.
Yeah, I think that's what makes the difference is that in this small farm, people will know exactly that on that hill, with the sun, the soil, they need to mix that one with that one which is more flat, but has got that particular taste. And thinking about my experience in Sancerre, it was so amazing to be with the owner, a few generation owner of the farm, and comparing the specificity of every production, even in such a small place, something like 20 acres, they could at least distinguish 4 or 5 different production in their property.
Yeah, that's the essence of this, though, correct? You couldn't make the same wine 5 minutes later or 5 miles down the road. It's about what's happening right now, what's in the air.
And the knowledge that you have of your soil, of your grapes, and the way to make an assemblage of these different production.
Assemblage makes me think of champagne. Do you have time for bubbles?
I always have time to bubble. There's some really good bubble in France. And,
yes, there are.
And the bubble are not just bubble. It's also, again, that combination, experience, know-how, particular soil, particular climate, and of course, the variety of grapes.
I understand that you're clearly a wine fan, but you're from Brittany.
Yep.
Where cider might be first on the menu.
I have to confess that Brittany was more known for helping the wine industry to flourish in other regions for its wine production. But I had my first connection really with wine a bit in the later part of my life. When I was a child, we were making our own cider. Once I remember we had one who was so powerful that it was exploding more than champagne. But we were not having that also tradition in the family. And so 1 year was good, 1 year was bad. So after a certain moment, my father decided to let the cider production to specialists.
It's probably best all the way around, I suspect. We'll leave the diplomacy to you and the winemaking to others. Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for hosting us in the residence. I think it's time for a toast.
To our friendship.
Cheers.
And thanks to the French ambassador for a conversation you will only see and hear on Bloomberg. By the way, the wines they were pouring last night, Hartford Court Chardonnay. This is at the state dinner from the Four Hearts Vineyard, a Pinot Noir from St. Innocent Winery, and an Iron Horse Classic Vintage Brut. California and Oregon represented. We've got a lot more coming up in our second hour of Balance of Power today, including a conversation with Congressman French Hill. The Republican from Arkansas is with us in studio. After we get up to date on world and national news, let's do that right now with Amy Morris in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Joe. A new poll finds Vice President Kamala Harris is gathering more support among swing state voters, something that could help President Biden withstand attacks from the GOP about his age. The Bloomberg News Morning Consult poll shows Harris as the top choice among those considered Democratic rising stars if Biden were unable to continue his campaign. And Donald Trump says Nikki Haley will be on his team, quote, in some form if he wins the White House. After a bitter campaign during which Haley called Trump unhinged, Haley this week told the Hudson Institute she will be voting for Trump. Now, Trump suggested after a rally in New York just yesterday that he would offer Haley a position in his administration if he were to win the White House. And the top UN court has ordered Israel to immediately halt its military operations in the southern Gaza city of Rafah, but stopped short of ordering a full ceasefire. Israel is not expected to comply with that. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris. Now back to Balance of Power with Joe Matthew.
All right, Amy, thank you, and thank you for being with us on the Friday edition of Balance of Power. Great hour coming up here. I want you to dial into YouTube, get on Bloomberg TV, whatever you need to do. You're going to want to be in the studio with us here. If you're driving around, stay with Bloomberg Radio. Congressman French Hill is going to join us in studio as we talk crypto and foreign policy. We'll be joined as well by Congressman Jonathan Jackson, the Democrat from Illinois, both in hour two. We've got a lot to talk about on this Friday in the Capitol, so do stay with us. I'm Joe Matthew. Straight ahead, hour two of Balance of Power on Bloomberg.
politics to the world of business. This is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
Crypto finally has its moment in Washington. Welcome to the fastest show in politics. As the new crypto market framework bill passes the House on the same week that the government approves the first Ethereum ETFs. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington, joined this hour by one of the most important crypto voices on Capitol Hill. Congressman French Hill, the Republican from Arkansas, will bring his view from the House Financial Services Committee right after we take a look at Wall Street. Let's start there right now with Charlie Pellet in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Well, hello there, Joe Matthew. We're looking at an update ahead of a long holiday weekend for a lot of people with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ 100 index. We'll throw in the Russell 2000, all very much in the green, close to the best level right now. S&P up 36 at 5304. That is a gain of just about 0.2%. We got the Dow up 70 right now for an advance of 0.2%. NASDAQ up by 1.1%. 10-year yield 4.46% with a 2-year 4.94%. Spot gold trading higher by 0.2%. West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.1%, 77.76 a barrel. Novo Nordisk's blockbuster diabetes drug Ozempic cut patients' risk of dying in a kidney disease study. The latest research pointing to the medicine's usefulness in a constellation of disorders. Novo Nordisk up today by 0.7%. Meanwhile, Eli Lilly is going to spend $5.3 billion to boost production of a key ingredient in its weight loss and diabetes shots after the treatment's explosive popularity led to shortages. Lilly up by about 0.1%. So again, recapping, we got a lot of green on the screen. Bitcoin today trading higher as well. Bitcoin up now by 1.2%, 68,573 on Bitcoin. Balance of Power continues now. Back we go to Washington once again. Here's your host, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you, and welcome to the Friday edition of Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew on Bloomberg TV and radio on the week that crypto grew up in Washington. That's what I keep hearing, at least. We've talked about this each step of the way, and House passage of the FIT21 market structure bill this week was the moment, and the cherry on top might have been the Ethereum ETFs being approved by the SEC. This has all been driven in part with the help of Congressman French Hill, the Republican from Arkansas. Not only serves on the House Financial Services Committee, it's important he is chair of the subcommittee on digital assets, financial technology, and inclusion, and he's with us at the table on this Friday. What a treat to see you in studio, sir. Welcome.
Great to be with
Cheers.
you, Joe. Glad to be with you.
Are you taking a victory lap here? This is something that a lot of people didn't think could happen in this Congress.
It's a big issue, and I'm so glad to see such a strong bipartisan vote. 279 members of the House voted for our market structure bill, which gives clarity for the first time and a roadmap for digital assets, how to offer them, where they trade, whether it's under SEC rules or the CFTC rules, how to be a dealer, how to be a broker, how to do custodian, be a custodian. So this was a big bipartisan success.
It needs to go to the Senate now, where I'm told it's a steeper climb. We've had some tell us that it does not have the votes to pass the Senate. What are you hearing?
Well, what's interesting, over the past 2 years, working for payment stablecoin legislation, which is a dollar-backed private stablecoin issued by the private sector, not a central bank digital currency. That work has bipartisan support. I've seen leaders in the Senate speak out in favor of that. And on the market structure bill, we've had Senate interest for years on that. Senators Loomis and Gillibrand, for example, have been working on ideas there. Senators Stabenow and Bozeman have been working on ideas. So I think we're listening to senators. I think our big vote, 279 votes in favor, 71 Democrat votes in favor, will help send a message that we've got text on market structure in a pretty good place to start working with the Senate on.
The alternative is come on down and register. Would this have happened without the approach that Gary Gensler has taken from the SEC?
Well, Chair Clayton under the Trump administration, Chair Gensler here in the Biden administration could have used exemptive relief along the way to narrow some of these regulatory gaps. But President Biden himself, in their executive order and in the Financial Stability Oversight Council's report, says there's a regulatory gap between commodities, securities, and how to do this in the right way. And they argue that it should have been a legislative solution. So I do think we've taken the right direction to have a legislative solution, and that perhaps neither Chairman Gensler at the SEC and certainly Chairman Benham at the CFTC could not really do it in a full, effective way without legislation.
Well, a lot of, as you know, crypto executives felt like they were being set up, that there was no real way to navigate because there were no rules to the road. And just coming in to quote-unquote register might cost you $250,000 in attorney's fees in dealing with the SEC.
Or more. I mean,
or more.
Or effectively, that just wasn't happening. Coming in register was just a black hole. There was no exit. It was the original Hotel California. You could check in, but you couldn't check out on that process. And so that's why, again, I think a legislative solution is the best way to go. And it'll be more effective for everybody in the space. Innovators, venture capitalists, consumer protection, investors.
I mentioned the Ethereum ETFs, of course, now on the heels of the Bitcoin ETFs. Is the institutional involvement that is predicted to follow here really what helps crypto mature? It helps your argument in Washington.
I think so. I think, look, Chairman Clayton and Chairman Gensler didn't feel like they had the right analytical framework to approve an exchange-traded product for Bitcoin. But after analysis and the work of Commissioner Peirce, they found that the cash market and the analytics around that looked stable, and so they approved Bitcoin. The federal court said they should approve Bitcoin ETP, and I think that federal court litigation and the analytic work done by the commission staff paved the way for this Ethereum decision this week.
Is stablecoin next then? You mentioned that there was talk about that maybe being put together with safe banking during the FAA extension. None of them happened. Right. What's the way forward?
Well, I think a dollar-backed payment stablecoin under U.S. law with U.S. oversight is a real critical need for this ecosystem. And so I do expect it to be next. I think Ranking Member Maxine Waters on the Financial Services Committee, Chairman Patrick McHenry have done a great job working on this. We've had tremendous engagement from the U.S. Treasury and the Federal Reserve, so I think we're close. But you're right. We're looking for that legislative vehicle for payment stablecoins. But to your point a few minutes ago about the Senate, I think there's solid Senate and House support to move that as well. We just have to find the right approach.
Maybe post-election on the agenda.
Could be. I mean, we're going to wait and
a lot
see
of
how to
crypto
take
money floating around in this campaign all of a sudden, isn't there?
I've seen that.
You have, yeah, and it's impacting some races in a big way. As we spend time with Congressman French Hill, I want you to put your hat on another committee, and that's Foreign Affairs. This has been a very busy week from China to Israel, and I'd like to ask you about both. You may be preparing a Codel right now and to go somewhere interesting in the world that you can tell us about. But the drills that we're seeing around Taiwan, I'd love to hear you speak to, because this has been framed, the biggest drills we've seen in some time by Beijing in the Taiwan Strait, framed as punishment for swearing in their new president. I spoke yesterday with the ranking member on the China Select Committee, the House China Select Committee, of course, Raja Krishnamurthy. Here's what he said about what appears to be a deteriorating relationship once again, Congressman. Let's listen.
I don't think it's maybe deteriorating as much as it's continuing to be maybe unresolved. I think that it's really up to Xi Jinping, Joe. I think that he needs to make a decision, which is, does he continue with this policy of aggression and provocative behavior, which could potentially lead to dangerous and catastrophic consequences in the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea?
How much of this is a danger, an increasing level of danger, versus, you know what, we see this movie every time Taiwan makes noise?
Well, it is a pattern of the Xi regime to intensify their military drills and be in a menacing and threatening way across the narrow Taiwan Strait whenever there appears to be progress towards supporting democracy on the island. Here we have the inauguration of a new democratically elected leader of Taiwan. Chairman Mike McCall of the Foreign Affairs Committee is leading our delegation to that inauguration. But you saw this same kind of behavior when Nancy Pelosi visited the island, when Chairman McCall and I were on the island last April.
Yes.
We had the exact same greeting.
They want to remind you that they could do a blockade in about 5 minutes if they wanted to.
They do, but look, I think fundamentally, Taiwan is a great democratic, economic, free market success story. They're big investors in China. The people of Taiwan want the status quo. They want to maintain their democracy, free and open navigation of the Taiwan Strait. They don't want to be by warfare or force or coercion compelled to join the communist regime in Beijing. Xi knows this, but this is how he tries to pull the string of his longstanding policy. Our policy here in the United States was founded back in 1979, where we committed that while we recognize China and Beijing as the capital of China formally, that we would maintain our economic policy and our defense policy of the people of Taiwan and let them build their democracy. And by golly, over the last 40 years, have they been successful in doing that?
And that's something. Would you go back to Taiwan knowing all of this?
I would. I think it's a magnificent, generous, innovative, amazing.
Even if it sparked more drills for them to deal with after you left.
Well, look, I think they want America, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Vietnam, regional players supporting them in their interest to pursue freedom, but status quo, not independence of China. Just let's keep the status quo, which allows our system to thrive. But the fear on the island is China turned their back on Hong Kong. They broke their word to the United Kingdom and the people of Hong Kong, and that's what's caused tensions in the region to remain high.
The UN's top court, the International Court of Justice, am I saying it right? I don't think most people have ever heard of this before, to be honest with you. While it is, of course, very real, the International Court of Justice says that Israel needs to pull military operations from Rafah now, and this came as part of a complaint by South Africa that alleged genocide in Gaza. We've got a new temporary pier that we just spent a lot of money on that doesn't seem to be bringing much aid into Gaza. What needs to happen?
I think we need to stand with Israel and let Israel use their best judgment on clearing the Hamas terror group out of Gaza.
Are they still in Rafah? Do we know?
There are elements still in Rafah. They still are in a position to attack. We have more dead bodies of hostages announced today. This is a terrible situation. And remember that Israel has suffered an attack on the scale larger than our attack of 9/11 from their point of view by a terror group backed by and financed by Iran, an enemy of the United States. So I think we should stand by our ally and let them take the actions that they need to take to defend their own
You don't
soil.
believe it's genocide, obviously.
I don't. And I think that the international court in this instance is wrong. We're not a party to that treaty, so we don't even think highly enough of that organization to be a subscriber to it. And I think what we ought to recognize is that we don't want this conflict to get broader. We need humanitarian aid there, and we need to recognize that Hamas is a political organization and a terror group backed by their allies like those in Turkey and Tehran have facilitated this kind of behavior through their financing and their tolerance of it. And for 20 years, Hamas has controlled Gaza. A lot of Americans don't know this. The Israeli government, the West Bank government, Fatah, Mahmoud Abbas, Americans, the Egyptians, they allowed Hamas, they won an election in 2006. They've had complete control of Gaza. Are the people better off under Gaza? What about the billions of dollars from the United Nations and donor countries? Do you see better schools? Do you see better nutrition? Do you see better jobs under the Hamas leadership? So,
should Benjamin Netanyahu come here to speak to a joint session of Congress because the speaker is reportedly on the verge of inviting him?
I think he should. I think an ally of the United States under attack by a group of people that we recognize as a global terror organization backed by the #1 state sponsor of terror, Iran, deserves to be heard in the United States.
What if Chuck Schumer says no? Does he come speak to the House alone?
I would think...
that would be quite a bit of optics.
I don't think that that's the way it would work. I believe that the majority leader would think long and hard about that.
What are you planning? You're probably not allowed to answer this for your next trip abroad. You've been conducting some pretty heady codels, including one recently to Syria. What's next on the list?
Well, I'm still concerned about countering the Assad regime and turning a terror state like Syria into a regional drug proliferation state in narco-terrorism that is poisoning young people across the Gulf and into Europe. So that's certainly something I'll remain committed to working on.
Not going to Lower Manhattan anytime soon.
Not anytime soon.
Tom Emmer was on the air. I tell you, he's struggling to keep the schedule working correctly because so many people are going to New York to show up at the courthouse.
We need all of our members available for voting. We have a 2-seat majority now. We're delighted to have the new gentleman from Bakersfield, California.
Has Vince Vaughn come by the office yet?
He has, and he'll be sworn in, and we look forward to his addition to our team.
Well, we always look forward to spending time with you. Thank you for coming to see us before you blast out of town. I hope you have a great holiday. Happy Memorial Day.
Have a great
if I can
Memorial
say
Day.
That. Thank you
Nice
very
to see
much.
you.
I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. That's Congressman French Hill as we assembled our panel for a quick hit on the issue that we were just talking about, the invitation of Benjamin Netanyahu that appears to be looming. Jeannie Shanzano is with us today. Of course, Bloomberg Politics contributor and senior democracy fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, alongside Maura Gillespie, Republican strategist, founder of Blue Stack Strategies. Jeannie, is this going to happen? And if so, does Chuck Schumer need to get on board and invite Benjamin Netanyahu to speak to a joint session of Congress?
Yeah, I think he should. I think he will. It certainly is an example of Johnson taking it to the Democrats. This is a tough one for the Democrats, but I think, the majority leader needs to make the case that he is supportive, as Chuck Schumer always has been, of Israel. It is this policies of Netanyahu that he has an issue with, and that invitation should be forthcoming. So I think he will do that, but it's not going to be easy for the Democrats. This is Johnson has done a good one here.
Maura, your thoughts on this? You worked for a speaker. What would it say if that invitation went out without the cooperation of the Senate leader?
I was there with Speaker Boehner when Netanyahu came to Congress previously under Speaker Boehner's invitation. And yes, it's preferred that it's a unified invitation that goes out in good faith by the majority leader as well as the Speaker of the House. But, the Speaker is the Speaker of the whole House, and it's his opportunity to do so. And I think, for the American people, it'll be an important opportunity to hear from Netanyahu. To support Israel, to Jeannie's point, is not necessarily to say that you support Netanyahu, but we as an ally of Israel need to hear about what's going on there directly from the sources.
Well, we'll discuss it a lot more as we learn more about this invitation. Our panel's going to stick with us, though, Jeannie and Maura, as Donald Trump makes tracks to the Bronx. Big rally last night, and it looked a lot different than the traditional MAGA rally. We'll get into that next. To the campaign trail on Balance of Power. This is Bloomberg.
121 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ solidly in the green right now ahead of a long holiday weekend for a lot of people. S&P right now at 53.03. Going to be very interesting to see whether we close above or below that 5,300 level. Got to keep it locked into Bloomberg Television and Radio for the latest. S&P up 36 right now, up 0.7%. We've got the Dow up 86, up by 0.3%. NASDAQ up 175, a gain there of 1%. To be sure, we do have the Dow Jones Industrial Average trading below that 40,000 threshold. 10-year, 4.46%. The 2-year, 4.94%. Spot gold is up 0.2% right now, 23.33 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.3%, 77.84 a barrel. Stocks higher after data this morning showed U.S. consumers tempered inflation expectations, bolstering sentiment regarding prospects for Federal Reserve rate cuts this year. Boeing is teaming up with its largest labor union and the FAA to review safety issues reported by employees, all part of a broader effort to address concerns about the company's safety culture. Boeing shares now up by 1%. Recapping a Friday rally underway, S&P higher now by 0.7%. Balance of power continues. Back we go to Washington, and once again, here he is, your host, Joe Matthew.
Okay, Charlie Pellet, we thank you, and we'll get back to Charlie a little bit later on this hour. Check on Friday trading here on a quiet day in the nation's capital. Not at all on the campaign trail, certainly not last night in New York as Donald Trump made his way to the Bronx. And pretty fascinating to see a much more diverse crowd than tends to gather for a Trump rally, but the color of the hats was the same. In deep blue New York, MAGA has its moment. Donald Trump even seems to think he could win the state of New York in this election, though many wonder what world in which that could happen. The fact of the matter is, both of these candidates are making a concerted effort to win the support of Black and Hispanic voters. And that probably would not be happening if we hadn't seen the deficit in recent polling that Joe Biden is showing. Let's assemble our panel for their take on all of it. Jeannie Shanzano is with us, Bloomberg Politics contributor, and now senior democracy fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Maura Gillespie here as well, Republican strategist, founder of BlueStack Strategies, spent many years working for the Speaker of the House, Speaker Boehner. Great to have you both with us here. Maura, I'll start with you. You know New York. You know the Republican Party. Where's Donald Trump looking here? What's the purpose of this exercise when no one seems to think he could win that blue state?
He sees, and Republicans see, a real opportunity to get the Black vote. You know, I think it's something that I don't think we talk enough about, the problems people are having with what's currently going on in more liberal run cities and states. You saw the results from Oregon's primary this week. Not great for progressives. I think that the progressive policies haven't benefited people. They're not feeling it in their pockets. And so the reflection of that is looking for somebody else's support where they felt like maybe times were better. I know that feels kind of, hard to imagine given that during Donald Trump's presidency, we were in COVID times. But prior to COVID, people felt like the economy was doing better. So yes, they are. You could be frustrated by Donald Trump. You could be, you don't have to like him to vote for him. And I think that we forget that as we talk about politics and talk about these choices. It's not binary to choose between the two as far as who you like better. It's about where do you personally feel you'll be doing better in 4 years from now.
Well, that's an important line, Jeannie. Don't have to like him to vote for him. What do you make of the crowd that showed up in New York? What does it say about New York and the candidate?
Yeah, there's nothing like a summer in the Bronx, Joe. And that's where Donald Trump was yesterday. And I have to say, and I say this reluctantly, it was a very smart move. He is doing what campaigns should be doing. We've often criticized, I shouldn't say you have not. I have often criticized Donald Trump for not reaching out beyond his base. We traditionally say he doubles down on his base. Well, this is an example of a truly smart campaign strategy of reaching out and taking it to the base of your opponent and saying, don't take this base for granted, Joe Biden and Democrats, because the fact is he doesn't have to win New York. No Republican has since Ronald Reagan. But what he can do is he can take it to Joe Biden, make Joe Biden spend money, make Joe Biden fight for those voters. And that is a brilliant strategy. The Democrats should be doing the same with Donald Trump's base. That's what you do. So very reluctantly, I say, for all the talk about, things 30, 40 years ago with Woolman Park and stuff, this was a very smart strategy on the Trump campaign's part.
Well, it's interesting, Maura. I keep hearing that only 6 or 7 states are going to decide this whole election. So why would either candidate go to a place like New York or California where it seems predetermined?
It may seem predetermined, but I do think that in both New York and California, you're starting to see some areas of those states where it's getting a little purple. And it's an opportunity to capitalize on those who are disillusioned by, government right now. They're not happy with the choices they have. And we've long said that it's not up to us as voters, or maybe I've long said that it's not up to us as voters to choose between the two, but it's up to those two candidates to convince us to vote for them. And so to Jeannie's point, Donald Trump going out and making his case to people who maybe aren't happy with how things are, well, he can make a case that he'll make it better. That's what candidates are supposed to be doing. And coming to the Bronx and going directly to them. I think one of the people who said there, we have a president here, we're going to listen at least. So I think that making that effort really does make an impact. Whether you think you're going to win that state or not, you're showing up.
Well, let's follow the money for a moment here, because one of the big headlines this week was Donald Trump and the RNC outraising Joe Biden and the DNC for the first time this cycle. And it's only 1 month, but they're hoping for a lot more, as Axios reports today that Senator J.D. Vance, supposedly on the list of potential vice presidential picks for Trump, and very close to Peter Thiel, is putting together a massive fundraiser with heavy hitters from Silicon Valley. It'll take place in, of all places, San Francisco on the 6th of June. Jeannie, how much does Joe Biden need to worry about the mega donors turning away from him and towards Trump?
Yeah, it is a concern. And again, talk about going to a blue area. There they go again. Maura just mentioned California. This will be in San Francisco. I think J.D. Vance has gotten the memo that if you want to be on the short list for VP, it is all about, well, first of all, paying homage to Donald Trump. And second of all, raising money. So he doesn't want to let Doug Burgum, win the game there. So he is doing this, and it's a smart strategy. They want to try to make what was the last month's numbers a trend. We don't know if we will see that at this point, because we can't forget Donald Trump just became the presumptive nominee. So that was a benefit and a boon for the April numbers. But yeah, they're going out there and they're going to try to make the case. And you've talked a lot about crypto on this show, Joe. Crypto has about $80 million to spend in this campaign as well at this point. So there's a lot of money there.
That's a huge part of the story, as we discussed with Congressman French Hill earlier, Jeannie. Then you've got big oil, Maura, and a fascinating story on the Bloomberg here. Donald Trump raised $40 million in 1 day, cash. Events in Houston and Dallas, described by people familiar with the events. $40 million in oil money. Remembering he was looking for $1 billion. There was a story in the Washington Post that he asked for $1 billion collectively from big oil to rescind all of the climate initiatives of the Biden administration. Maybe not $1 billion, but this is one of the highest single-day hauls for a presidential candidate ever, Maura. And big oil has more money to spend, right?
Absolutely. And again, the policies of the Biden administration, but progressives around the country has not been, seen as successful. So you're seeing a big push in Texas for energy. It's a huge issue there. And there's a lot of money there. I mean, there's a lot of money to be gleaned from donors there. And so it's maybe not $1 billion, but there's more to go, as you mentioned. And I think that's an opportunity, again, in places where the policies or failed policies of the progressives are being reflected in communities like San Francisco, like in Austin, and in New York City. So it's definitely starting to get to people. And again, there is a lot of donors who have been sitting on the sidelines that maybe are now taking a more active role.
At the same time, though, we must acknowledge that the United States is cranking out more oil than ever. We are pumping more oil than any time in our history, Jeannie. Does Joe Biden actually have to start saying that out loud?
He absolutely should. And I think he should also stand up and say what people across the Democratic and Republican Party realize, that when Donald Trump made that promise, give me $1 billion and I will push back on all the steps the Biden administration has made as it pertains to our environment, that impacts our children and our grandchildren. You want to get support from young people. The environment is critically important to how so many of them think, because they are worried about the future. So I think the Biden team needs to put this in stark terms. Joe Biden understands, to your point, we are pumping more oil, but we all have an interest and deep concern about the impact of the environment. Donald Trump is interested in himself, and he's willing to trade all of that for $1 billion for himself to pay off his lawyers. So that is something they should be saying. They haven't said it yet, but who knows? They may once they hear your show, Joe.
Yeah, well, God knows they're listening, Jeannie. Today's, by the way, the big gas price, the average today, AAA, national average going into Memorial Day weekend, $3.60 a gallon. When you look to New York, it's $3.68. Look to Illinois, where Democrats are going to have their convention this summer, $4 is a 4 handle. And in California, the aforementioned, I know it's not like the rest of the world, but $5.14. Great panel, great conversation. Love spending time with Jeannie Shanzano and Maura Gillespie. We thank you both as we carry on a balance of power. Let's update world and national news now with Amy Morris in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Joe. A new poll finds Vice President Kamala Harris gathering more support among swing state voters, something that could help President Biden withstand attacks from the GOP about his age. The Bloomberg News Morning Consult poll shows Harris as the top choice among those considered Democratic rising stars if Biden were unable to continue his campaign. And while Biden trails Donald Trump by 4% in 7 swing states, nearly half of swing state voters, 48%, say they trust Harris to fulfill the duties of the presidency if Biden were no longer able to serve. Donald Trump says Nikki Haley will be on his team, quote, in some form, if he wins the White House. After a bitter campaign during which Haley called Trump unhinged and not fit to be president, Haley this week told the conservative think tank, the Hudson Institute in Washington, D.C., that she would be voting for Trump. Trump suggested after a rally in New York yesterday that he would offer Haley a position in his administration if he were to win the election. The top UN court has now ordered Israel to immediately halt its military operations in the southern Gaza city of Rafah, but stopped short of ordering a full ceasefire. The court ruled that Israel must open the Rafah border crossing for humanitarian assistance and submit a report on the measures it is taking to do that within a month. But the court doesn't have any enforcement authority, and Israel is not expected to comply with this order. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
Wall Street. We do check markets all day long at Bloomberg. Stocks holding close to session highs. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ 100 index, Russell 2000, all in the green as we head into a long holiday weekend for a lot of people. S&P up 36 right now, gain there of 0.7%. Dow Industrials are advancing by 60 points, up 0.2%. NASDAQ up 1.1%. The Russell 2000 up by 1%. 10-year yield, 4.46%. The 2-year, 4.94%. Spot gold is advancing by 0.2% right now, $23.33 the ounce. And a gain today for West Texas Intermediate crude, $77.81 a barrel, up right now by 1.2%. Stocks higher after data showed U.S. consumers tempered inflation expectations, bolstering sentiments regarding prospects for Fed rate cuts this year. On an up day for the market, a couple of notable exceptions trading lower. After earnings, we have got shares of Workday now lower by 14.6%. Also after earnings, Intuit down now by 8.2%. Balance of power continues. Back we go to Washington. And once again, here's your host, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet, we thank you. Welcome to the Friday edition of Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington as we look at a poll, if I can call it that, that captures the attention of the White House and every political campaign that's out there. The fact of the matter is it's not a poll in the traditional sense. It's consumer sentiment. The University of Michigan. Tempered by inflation expectations in late May is the headline. U.S. consumers tempering their expectations in the second half of May compared with earlier this month, though high prices continued to weigh on sentiment. And that's where we start our conversation with my colleague, David Weston, of course, the host of Bloomberg Wall Street Week, and a conversation we have each week at this time. It's great to see you, David, from World Headquarters in New York. I don't know your thoughts on this. As someone who truly straddles Washington and Wall Street, sometimes we can learn more in data like this than we do in what people are telling a pollster on a cell phone.
Well, it certainly should be what President Biden and his team are focused on. It's been the issue for some time. I mean, I will say, and this is just me talking now, it felt like it took them a little while to catch up with it, just as it did the Fed, by the way. It took a little while, too, to get serious about inflation. And for too long, perhaps, the president was saying, isn't it great we have more jobs? And a lot of people were saying, well, we might have jobs, but we have to pay a lot more for what we buy at the grocery store, at the gas station. And right now, it looks like a lot of people are focused on that as much as what the economists might tell us about strictly the economy.
Yep, I just checked, by the way, $3.60, the national average, according to AAA. So it came down a little bit. People feel maybe a little bit better about that, but this is a temporary effect. David, we're going into the summer driving season, and if fortunes are resting on the price of gasoline, that should be a real worry for Joe Biden.
Yeah, absolutely. And the problem, and you and I have talked about this, Joe, a fair amount. The problem is when inflation goes down, it doesn't mean the price goes down. It just means the price goes up less fast. And so people are still saying what I'm paying, whether it's the gas pump or whether it's in the grocery store, is more than it was 2 or 3 years ago. And I'm really feeling the pinch rather badly. And that's a challenge for this president. I'm not sure exactly what he can say about that to make feel better. The one thing I suspect he cannot say is, oh, no, it's really not that bad, because people feel it, and it's hard to say that their feelings are wrong.
And they're reminded of it every day, as we like to say. That's the big billboard out there with the price of gasoline, never mind a trip to the grocery store. And so it brings us to the question, David Weston, that a lot of folks are going to be asked in the months ahead. Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago?
Yeah, and what difference will it make whether it's Joe Biden or Donald Trump in the White House come next year after this election in November? A question that we've been trying to ask on Wall Street Week repeatedly. And this week, as you know, Joe, we had Paul Krugman. He won a Nobel Prize for economic sciences. He's a columnist, of course, for the New York Times. But we asked him the question, what difference does it really make who is in the White House? And this is part of what he had to say.
In a lot of ways, the economy of 2024 looks a lot like the economy of 2019, pre-pandemic. Full employment, fairly low inflation. It's, we're worrying a little bit, but we're worrying about the difference between 2 and 3, not anything major. It doesn't look as if it has made a whole lot of difference who's in the White House. But if there's a Trump 2, then there's a lot of reasons to believe that it could be very different.
Now, this is one thing we're hearing repeatedly, is you shouldn't count on what President Trump did the first time as really being a precursor of what he might do this time, because there is discussion, including from some around Donald Trump, that it could be very, very different. So we went into that with Paul Krugman. And it's interesting, Joe, the thing he led with actually was immigration. He said, listen, if you take him seriously, that he's going to have these camps, he's going to round up a lot of immigrants. He would say people who are unlawfully here, but he said he might catch some that are lawfully here as well. It could really affect the workforce and really drive up inflation, to go back to what we were talking about.
That's absolutely right. And this is a conversation that's not going to go away, by the way, between now and November. It's appearing. But when I go back to what Paul Krugman said, in a lot of ways, the economy now is a lot like the economy of 2019. So are some people going to answer that question? Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago by saying, well, actually, it's kind of the same?
Yeah, it's a great question, Joe. I certainly don't know the answer to it. I really think we tend to underestimate, whether it's the markets or people, the scars of the pandemic, you know, because it's not the same as 2019, because we've been through an awful lot since 2019. And whether rightly or wrongly, we all feel that it's been an awfully rough time for people. And I think they're looking for some sort of hope. And I don't know whether that's Joe Biden or Donald Trump that gives them that hope.
Some worry that it's neither. David Weston, what else do you have coming up on the program tonight?
Well, we also talked to Paul Krugman about the debt and deficit, whether we should be worried about it. And we also spend a fair amount of time on China, something very much in the news in Washington as well as New York, as the one issue, as you and I have talked about, that seems to have real bipartisan support, is that we don't like China right now. But we talked with Henry McVeigh, who runs the balance sheet for KKR, who just got back from China, about what's going on in China, the problems they're having with real estate, and whether it makes any sense to invest there. And finally, we have a name you will remember, Christine Todd Whitman. Remember, she was governor of New Jersey,
yes,
also was an EPA administrator, and she has been quite involved in nuclear power in recent days. And we had her on to talk about what they call small modular reactors. These are like little nuclear reactors, which have really come back into vogue right now because of data centers and AI. It all comes back to AI, doesn't it? But I love this. We have to have a lot more power. And she's saying, well, if you really want a lot more power, this is a nifty way to do it.
This is a really important conversation. I'm so glad that you're getting to this because, David, we're hearing about data centers that want to open on the site of a nuclear power plant, because obviously nobody's making any new plants anytime soon, but the solution you're talking about would bring that power to the data center. Is that the future of data center and AI?
Well, certainly Christine Todd Whitman thinks it should be an important part of it. And obviously the issue is regulation, because the regulations have been so difficult to overcome. And she admits, look, you need to be safe with them, although she says these are much, much safer than the big power plants you're talking about that are being retreaded now, perhaps.
No doubt.
Says, but she thinks there is growing pressure to really deal with the EPA and the regulations and say, okay, let's get our way past this. Let's figure this out. The engineering's gotten a lot better.
Wall Street's certainly on this. Just look at that Constellation Energy chart if you want a reminder, right?
Well, and
David,
look at utility stocks. Utility stocks are really up on that.
Absolutely. It's one of the more interesting wrinkles in this AI story. Bloomberg Wall Street Week, we don't miss it. It follows Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio starting at 6 p.m. Wall Street time. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Thank you, David, and have a great Memorial Day weekend. They worked until the wee hours in the House of Representatives, a late night for lawmakers, with a knockdown, drag-out markup session on the farm bill. This is now the newest controversy in Washington. When I say farm bill, I'm not only talking about farmers, I'm talking about food stamps. This is going to expire in September. Lawmakers are trying to get their arms around it right now. And the debate in the markup session went on for some time. Congressman Jonathan Jackson speaking passionately about this in the process, the Democrat from Illinois' 1st District. Let's listen.
To be sure, this bill compels us to move beyond the politics of blame so that we might embrace a more excellent way. In fact, I would go so far as to say that the Farm Bill is one of the few manifestations of the social contract this government makes with the American people. The SNAP program I would like to focus in on more singularly is a moral achievement.
And he's now with us at the table. Congressman Jonathan Jackson, thank you for coming to see us today at Bloomberg. It's good to see you.
Great to see you.
Get some rest after all that?
Yes, it's been great.
Funny, people say there's nothing left on Capitol Hill, but there's one big one left. It's called the Farm Bill.
Sure.
When did food stamps get to be so controversial? I heard Republicans in that markup session talking about robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Right. It seems like in its 118th Congress has a lot of unique things, but essentially we're talking about 1.5 trillion with a T budget that's looking out over a 5-year reauthorization, over a 10-year horizon. And out of the $1.5 trillion, 80% of that funds are going towards the SNAP, the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program.
That's right.
And I have to put the focus on supplemental nutrition and assistance. The other side of that coin is dealing with malnutrition. There is rising malnutrition. If you did not have this part of the budget focused on the farming, you'd be talking about almost $15 billion in increasing malnutrition amongst American citizens. 42 million Americans qualify for supplemental nutritional assistance. Roughly $180 a month would go to these persons, $2 per meal. This is the 80% of the Farm Bill, so it goes to show you that there's food insecurity in America that we have to deal with.
Joni Ernst joined us just the other day, the senator from Iowa, said there will be no new Farm Bill. We're going to have to extend the one we have and come up with a new product. Are you hearing talk like that as well?
I'm not, but that very well could be the case. I'm more optimistic.
Yeah.
We have a great chairman and a great ranking member, Chairman Thompson, ranking member Scott. So I'm very confident, or feel highly confident, or shall I say very hopeful that we'll get through this.
Congressman, tomorrow we're going to mark 4 years since the death, the murder of George Floyd. This is going to be a moment for our country. You were at George Floyd's funeral, and there was a thought at that time that there was great change coming, and in some cases we saw it, particularly at the local level, in new laws and regulations for policing, on the state level primarily. But there was something called the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act that passed the House some time ago. It went nowhere from there, and Sheila Jackson Lee reintroduced it this week. What's different now when it comes to that legislation? Could it pass again?
It seems like everything has changed. It seems to be a complete reversal, if you will, a retreatment and a retrenchment on corporate America's commitment to racial, social, and justice equity. We've seen in the extension of our annual budget of the budget that passed, the DEI, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office on Capitol Hill was removed from out of the building. Now people are being sued after the overturn of the affirmative action ruling, if you will, that 13 attorney generals from each state sent letters to the Fortune 100 corporations saying if you have a diversity, equity, and inclusion program in place, that is subject to be challenged and sued.
How did DEI become a swear word?
I don't know. I mean, just is the most bizarre things. But then again, there are a lot of things that are anomaly here that have happened. How do we have a president, if you will, on trial for prostitution, if you will, and I don't know what hush money payments are. That's actually bribery. I mean, like a lot of things have happened. We used to say, look up to the president.
Well, my
and
God.
if you're talking about looking up to what's happened in food, how do we become mean towards women and children? What we should be talking about is a war on poverty, not a war on the poor. These are the most vulnerable people in our society that qualify for SNAP. People don't want to have this supplemental nutritional assistance. So therefore, if you got crop insurance, meaning that there's climate issues that are out of our control, that are going through Iowa and Oklahoma and Kansas and devastating the land and the farmers, that's a subsidized program that the federal government has for farm insurance. I've come to look at SNAP as food insurance and family insurance that the government uses. So when people cannot do for themselves, I think the government should help them. When the people can do for themselves, the government needs to step back. Right now, people are aching. There's been auto inflation, there's been housing inflation, there's education, if you will, the cost of education, inflation. But this farm bill doesn't even address to deal with food inflation. And so to think that we could talk about taking $30 billion off of out of the budget to attack women and children, we're going to take a stand and we're not going to concede an inch.
You just said a lot, and I don't know anything about any prostitution charges in this case, but when we talk about...
Well, it's called pornography, but I like to call it what I think it is.
Understood what you're referring to, Congressman. What can you do in the rest of this Congress then? It sounds like your focus is on the Farm Bill, it's on food stamps as your answer to what you see as this cultural reversal. Am I right?
Yes. It's a war on the poor, that people, the American people, have a housing issue. That's becoming 50% of the average consumer's income. We're talking about the average car is now $40,000. That's going beyond people's reach. Student debt is now shaping an entire generation where they're having to make a decision between
This is why a lot of people are criticizing Joe Biden for higher prices.
Right.
Does he deserve it?
No, I think there was a supply chain issue. I think we're going through a structural readjustment that the American people deserve, if you will, an FDR moment or Franklin Delano Roosevelt moment by President Biden to come and talk to the American people. Do the White House, do the fireside chat.
Yep.
This is our money. It's going abroad for wars. Here's what our benefit is and the peace dividend that we can expect after we define the victory. Here's what our money is going for defense. Here's where our money is going for allies abroad. And for this generation, here's what's going to be your big deal. And then the student loan debt relief is good and great, but we got to do more than that. What's the investment that enhances their life? And that's what they're being hopeful and waiting for.
I hope you have a great Memorial Day weekend. I want you to come back and talk to us about the campaign and whether the black vote will be there for Joe Biden. Would you do that for us?
I'd be honored to do so.
Thank you, Congressman.
Take care.
Jonathan Jackson, thank you, sir.
Thank you for having me.
On Bloomberg TV and radio, live from Washington, this is Balance of Power.
Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very good afternoon, everybody. Live on radio, TV, YouTube, Bloomberg Originals. It's Friday.
Oh, it feels like Friday. It feels like a summer Friday, doesn't it?
It so feels like
Maybe a holiday weekend
Friday
on the horizon?
Well, funny that you say that.
Okay, why?
Yeah, it's the beginning of summer, the Memorial Day weekend.
Ah, yes.
It's a long weekend. Can you tell? We're a little bit wacky. Hi, everybody. Happy Friday. It is Friday, May 24th. We got an interesting trade. We've got stocks gaining a little bit ahead of the holiday weekend. Latest eco data showing that American consumers are pulling back on their inflation expectations. So maybe, the great parlor game of when the Fed will cut rates.
We're still playing that?
Well, it seems like a little bit more optimistic on this Friday.
Okay, at least for this minute.
Yeah.
At least for this minute.
Exactly.
Okay, for us on this Friday, Boeing is where we're starting the program today. Where to start, though, when it comes to the company? Cash burn, more FAA safety reviews. We look into Boeing's long road back.
Indeed we do. Plus, it's Ozempic and Wegovy's world, and we are just seemingly and increasingly benefiting from it. We've got an update on that one.
Plus, the summer season is here, and predictions it will be a record one, at least when it comes to travel. We talk trends with Haley Berg over at Hopper.
We do know it's going to be messy. We talked about that yesterday. One more thing. Hey, finance bros, Girl on Couch has your official summer 24 anthem.
Maybe.
We're all talking about
Maybe
this in the
official
newsroom.
Anthem. We'll
maybe,
see.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe, baby. All right, first up, let's get a check on the trade today. And your top business stories. Here is Charlie Pepper.
Hi, thank you very much. And here's what's going on higher across the board. As you correctly point out, long holiday weekend ahead of us. We're looking at gains. S&P right now up 39, up 0.7%. 53.06, the big question, at least on my mind. We're going to close above or below that number. Keep it locked into Bloomberg Television and Radio to get the answer. Again, 53.07 right now on the S&P. Dow Industrials up 68, up 0.2%. NASDAQ up 197, up 1.2%. Broad-based rally on this Friday. We've got the Russell 2000 up by 0.9%. 10-year, 4.46%. The 2-year, 4.94%. Spot gold up 0.2%. 23.33 the ounce on gold. West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.3%. 77.86 a barrel. Workday shares plunging, now down 15.1%, the most in more than 4 years, after the software company cut its full-year forecast for subscription revenue. Also lower in the tech world after earnings. Intuit shares down now by 7.9%. Again, recapping, we got stocks higher. The Dow, the S&P, all in the green, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It is indeed. All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. As Tim mentioned earlier, Boeing definitely on our mind today. It's actually up about 1.3% here. It did release its third annual safety report today, saying it's teaming up with its largest union, labor union, and the Federal Aviation Administration to review safety issues reported by employees. It's part of a broader effort to address concerns about the company's safety culture. FAA Administrator Michael Whitaker saying in an interview on Bloomberg, on Good Morning America yesterday, that it will take time for Boeing to right its ship. Take a listen.
We've been working closely with them the last 90 days on what that plan is going to look like. It's to bring the quality back where it needs to be at their factories. It's to bring the safety system where it needs to be and bring the culture where it needs to be so that employees can speak up when they see something that is concerning. What we are seeing next week is the plan going forward. It's not the end of the process, it's the beginning, and it's going to be a long road to get Boeing back where they need to be making safe airplanes.
All right, that is FAA Administrator Michael Whitaker. That was in an interview on Good Morning America yesterday.
We should note the stock is down more than 30% so far this year. It took a big dive yesterday after it said it expects a net cash burn for the year. For more on all of this and more, we turn to Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Aerospace, Defense, and Airlines Analyst George Ferguson, who joins us from New Jersey. George, good to see you this afternoon. FAA Administrator Michael Whitaker says it's a long road. How long do you think it will be? And what's the duration and the durability of that recovery here?
So thanks for having me on. So I think it's, is it a forever road? It's, right, I think safety, quality are going to have to be sort of the two North Stars in Boeing's universe. And, given the amount of scrutiny they're under because of the problems they've had people are going to be watching them very closely for some time. But I think that, as they continue to increase, or as they look to increase rate, if they go to the 38 they're looking for by the end of the year on the 737 per month, and as they move towards rates that will be in the 50s, which were similar to what they were pre-pandemic, the big challenge will be getting to those higher rates, pushing the supply chain, to bring that amount of componentry to the factory floor, and pushing their employees to putting it together correctly, so it's a safe product all the way, right? And it remains challenging, right? Because you got to keep moving to these higher rates and do it well. So I don't think, I think I don't think this ever stops, right? The most important thing is for them to be building, again, quality, safe products, and it just gets more difficult as you crank up the number that you're building. So forever.
Yeah, I want safe planes, no doubt about it. And I feel like lived through an era where we're like, what Boeing plane are you flying on? Like, it's just interesting how we talk about this kind of things. The cash burn, though, the longer this goes on for Boeing to kind of get it right, George, financially, I mean, I don't know, like, what's the strains? What's that financial picture? Can they financially get through this on their own? Does the government need to step in? I don't know. How are you thinking about that?
And that can't last forever, right? And so I don't know that it was a huge surprise to many people in the marketplace that Boeing wasn't going to get to cash flow positive this year. It frankly seemed to us to be a bit of a stretch when they disclosed it previously. I will say that they came to the market for the $10 billion bond deal in the last couple of weeks. The market seemed very, very receptive. It was well oversubscribed. But you can't keep doing that forever, because, again, the credit folks are going to get concerned after a while about continuing to feed your cash needs. Really, Boeing had a very sort of hockey stick-like projection, we'd say, in the business for the back end of 2024, where they would get themselves back to the 38 builds per month on the 737, which is the cash flow generator by the end of the year. Again, I don't think the marketplace would be surprised if that doesn't happen. But I think as you get into 2025, you need to be moving back into those upper 30s, 40s rates. So you starting to generate cash and stabilize the business. And I think they've got the cash they need to get there at this point, right?
Okay.
But I think if that timetable starts to slip and slips, materially slips into mid-year next year, there'll be a lot more questions about it. So, I mean, I think they've... Go ahead, sorry.
I'm sorry. I was just struck that you said that you weren't caught off guard yesterday by those comments from Boeing about not being cash flow positive.
Investors certainly were.
Exactly. Investors were. The market was totally taken aback. The stock tanked 7.5%. It was its worst day since January. What did the market not see that you saw?
Well, I mean, look, there's still a lot of analysts on the street that have buys in Boeing, and I think are still believing everything management says, right? And I think management is doing their best right now, but most of the time when management comes out and tells us something, the timetables are too compressed, in our view. And so, and look, I think 7% is a bad day, but yeah, Boeing's down, 30% on the year. So, yeah, I don't know. It was a surprise for some, but I don't know that everybody was that surprised.
Hey, what about the news last night that it stopped delivering planes to China after it just kind of had gotten, just months after ending, I think it was a 5-year hiatus, that they've stopped again delivering to customers in China. I mean, that's an important market. I mean, I don't need to tell you that. I'm like saying, Captain Obvious over here. But I mean, what's the significance of that?
No, it's a very important market, and a lot of Boeing's inventory, airplanes that are already built and ready for delivery, this shadow factory, that CEO Dave Calhoun talked about getting rid of by the end of the year. A lot of that needs to get delivered into China, and so it's super important. But as I read it, it was about lithium batteries, I believe, in some of the black boxes. I read it yesterday. Could be off a little bit because it was small. My guess is that they'll get around that issue. They ought to get around that issue, within I would hope days, but maybe it'll take weeks or a month. And then they can continue to get that shadow factory delivered out, right? And I think that's a big drag on Boeing. So I didn't think the issue was that large. China is very important to us too. I think we're really going to take a very close look at once the shadow factory is delivered, once those airplanes that are already built for China and sent over there, are complete, whether China comes back in for more Boeing orders and deliveries. Prior to the pandemic, China was 300 737s or A320s per year. They were a very sizable part of the narrow body market, as we call it. Last year, they took about 80. China is going through some growth issues right now. They haven't been taking the same number of airplanes. The question is, will that market become as important? And will Boeing be a big portion of that market? And I think those are two questions that are open. I don't think China's bouncing back to 300 a year, even in 2025. I think we're pushed further than that.
And you're right, the halt stems, it was requested by the Civil Aviation Administration of China. They wanted additional info related to batteries used in cockpit voice recorders. So that came out at that Wolf Research Conference from the CFO over at Boeing.
Hey, George, before we let you go, I know we're going to go there, and it has to do with the head of the company. The company's still looking for a CEO at this point, Boeing, that is. Can you give us not any update on who you think it will be necessarily? Nobody knows that. But what about internal versus external, or maybe some names if you want to give them to us?
Yeah, so I don't know that I'm very good with names on this, right? I think a lot of us in the marketplace are poring over names. The challenge here is that I think Boeing needs a proven CEO with manufacturing, I don't know, prowess, manufacturing, real manufacturing skill. And I guess part of me wonders if there are many of those left in America, right? Larry Culp keeps coming to mind. Lots of the CEOs seem to be more focused on financials. I feel like that's the reason why they won't go internal, because I feel like Boeing has lost that culture and need to regain it. And there's some great manufacturers, I guess, still in America, but maybe not as many as we used to have. There's some in the Midwest, like Cat and Deere and companies like that.
Yeah.
I wonder if they're going to go to an old industrial manufacturing company like that, and go pluck away either a CEO. But I think we need a rock star here. I don't think this is an up-and-coming person that's going to try their hand at the factory floor. I think this has to be a rock star, and that's why it's such a difficult decision, and people are finding it really hard to find a great name on this.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. Hey, listen, thanks. Have a great weekend. Really good holiday weekend. Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Aerospace, Defense, and Airlines Analyst George Ferguson. George, thank you so much. All right, Boeing shares, as we mentioned, just up about 1% actually in today's session, but down 7.5% yesterday. From Boeing to the broader market we go.
Well, the reaction to NVIDIA's results showed that Wall Street remains laser-focused on AI. Investors are increasingly looking beyond the usual suspects to find the next AI winner. So let's talk about the trade post NVIDIA, because that's where we are in a week that we could see the S&P 500 down or a little changed after 4 weeks of gains, and shaping up to be just quite the month for the S&P 500. With us is Bloomberg News equities reporter Ryan Vlastelica, joins us from Chicago. Ryan, good to see you this afternoon. Happy Friday. How are investors right now thinking about AI beyond the usual suspects?
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. So yeah, everyone still remains focused on NVIDIA first and foremost, but there is sort of a growing understanding that when you get away from them, there's going to be a lot of infrastructure that is required to build out AI and AI capabilities. And that means companies from a number of sectors that maybe haven't been considered first and foremost. So obviously you have NVIDIA, and then, connected to the chips, you have the various servers, which is why companies like Dell and Supermicro have been doing well. But when you get a little beyond that and you realize that AI computing is going to require just a ton of data centers, which could mean some growth for the data center real estate investment trust like Digital Realty. It's going to mean a lot of demand for electricity, which has implications for companies that are connected to the power grid and power generators. Companies like Vistra, which is up more than 150% this year. It's just, you kind of think of these utility companies as being sort of boring, defensive, low-growth names. But when you consider about the just a surge of electricity and energy that's going to be needed to run AI. This really does make some of these kind of lower, under the ground, under the radar companies a lot more enticing to people, especially since, like I said, some of them have been traditionally considered defensive. They might have a high dividend yield.
Right.
It just means that they're kind of checking a lot of boxes for people who are looking beyond, a company like NVIDIA, which has more than tripled last year. It's more than doubled so far this year. People might be, even if you're still optimistic about their growth story, you might be wondering how much room does this have to go? Let's look elsewhere. And these are other companies that maybe, don't have the kind of broader name recognition, but are still going to be participating in the AI growth story.
It definitely makes you think about the build out, right? And the infrastructure part of it. Like, it doesn't matter like who's really going to benefit from it, but everybody kind of needs to do the build out. There needs to be the support structure. Having said that, I feel like we've had some conversations with Ian King and others, Ryan, that NVIDIA is still the first mover advantage, or has the first mover advantage, that their technology is ahead of everybody else, and that their runway, Tim, is going to be pretty long.
A Bloomberg intelligence analyst says that 2 to 3 years ahead of others when it comes to this tech, Carol. So, it's pretty remarkable. That's a mode.
Yeah, that's a mode. Hey, Ryan, how are you thinking about the week? I am looking at NVIDIA up about 14% this week, but we're looking at an S&P 500 that, depending on how we end, it's pretty flat right now for the week, but we could see it's, I think, first down week out of 4 consecutive weeks of gain. So a little bit of a different tone this week.
Yeah, I was actually very surprised yesterday to see how broadly tech fell, even in the wake of a pretty strong report out of NVIDIA. You would expect sort of a rising tide narrative or just sort of increased optimism about AI overall. Didn't really see that follow through just on a broader mega cap level. So there is still a lot of focus about, valuations. There's a lot of focus about Federal Reserve policy. It's not purely just an NVIDIA story, although, we did see yesterday that stock rose, I think, 9.3% or something like that. Just incredibly strong gains for them. People did have a pretty strong earnings report so far this season. All the mega cap names pretty strong overall. So, this was certainly validation of that theme, but certainly has been some consolidation there as well.
Hey, real quickly, you got another story on the Bloomberg about NVIDIA stock split. Looks to be the first of many in technology, right? Tech never used to be. They didn't have to. Their share prices just went up, crazy numbers, and so investors were pretty happy. B of A saying this, though, get ready for more from the tech community. And just got about 30 seconds.
Absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. Well, there's a number of companies out there that have stock prices above 500, above 400, which Bank of America says maybe this is sort of the threshold where you start to see some more of these companies split their stocks. Obviously, this is something that doesn't have a ton of fundamental implications for them, but it does make it maybe a little bit more accessible to retail investors in particular. Some of the companies that listed were, names like, Netflix, for example, or ServiceNow, or, so on and so forth. These kinds of names that have a ton of name recognition, probably consumer favorites. If they did split their stock, we do see at least sort of a near-term pop. And according to Bank of America, you do see companies that split their stock do well over the longer term.
Ryan Vlastelica, have a great weekend. Hey, coming up, AI is one trend. So is the investment in health care trend that is always on our radar. We've got the latest on those GLP-1 drugs. That's next.
It's 2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long at Bloomberg. We are looking at an up Friday here with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ solidly in the green. Right to the numbers with the S&P now up 39 at 53.06. That is a gain now of just about 0.7%. Dow Industrials up 44, higher by 0.1%. NASDAQ up 201. For NASDAQ, a gain of 1.2%. 10-year, 4.46% with a 2-year that's yielding 4.94%. Spot gold up $6.50 the ounce to $23.35, up now by 0.3%. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.5%, 78 even for a barrel of West Texas Intermediate crude. Stocks climbed after data this morning showed consumers tempered inflation expectations, bolstering sentiment regarding prospects for Fed rate cuts this year. Sources say Alphabet's Google will be investing about $350 million in Flipkart. That is the Indian online retailer that's controlled by Walmart. Meanwhile, Capital One Financial will no longer be the exclusive issuer of Walmart credit cards after Walmart succeeded in a lawsuit regarding the relationship. Again, recapping, we do have stocks advancing. S&P at 53.05. We've got the S&P up now by 0.7%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. So Tim and I joke, sort of, but are kind of serious.
It's not a joke.
It's not a joke. When we say that this may be the drug that fixes so much that ails us, if you can get it, as the supply chain is definitely stressed. We are talking about the GLP-1 class of weight loss drugs.
Some new findings today from Novo Nordisk when it comes to kidney disease. Meantime, Lilly spending billions to boost production of a key ingredient for its weight loss and diabetes shots. Talk about a trend in our society and in our investment world. Here is our reporter busy on this beat. We've got her with us in the Bloomberg studio. Bloomberg News health reporter Madison Muller. She's with us right now. What do you want to say, Carol?
Well, I want to ask you, do you feel like just things are coming at you constantly when it comes to this beat?
Yeah, it's unexpected that like I could be so focused on one area of healthcare and it be so busy all the time. Like most of the other people are healthcare reporters, cover like many different things, but for me lately it's just been obesity drugs all the time. And there's so much news like constantly, every week, every day, something is happening.
Okay, let's talk about some of the recent news. I want to start with the Novo and the kidney disease news because I don't have the list in front of me, but it seems like every few weeks we talk to you about some sort of new ailment that preliminary research at least suggests that this could help.
Right. And we kind of got a hint of this last year when Novo stopped a trial early and the market went crazy. It was a trial in kidney disease and the stopping early sort of indicated that there were some successful results. We didn't really know anything. They didn't say anything about it. They just said they were stopping the trial early and like the market reacted to that. So I think there was already some anticipation that these results were going to be good and they were, and they showed that, you know, there is another possible indication. You know, obviously it's not approved in kidney disease yet, but like we've talked about, metabolic disease, obesity, diabetes are very closely linked to other health conditions like heart disease, kidney disease, liver disease. So it's not entirely a surprise that it would help with kidney disease, but you know, it's like we were talking about, this is the first time we've had a medication that helps this much with weight loss, that is this effective in weight loss, this effective really in diabetes too. And so it's helping with all of these other conditions as well.
Well, so, and that's what I'm curious about is that, I don't know if we're having some problems. Are we having some technical problems? No. Okay. Maybe it's just in my IFB.
It's in your head, Carol. The technical problems are with you.
The list is long. Madison, I guess, does it always just come down to, we were talking before we got started, that we're just finding out a very simplistic but important idea that, and you have to be so careful because I know weight is sometimes a real struggle for a lot of individuals, that being thinner is healthier. Does it come down to that, or is there something really special in this medication that is doing something else? Or is it really just about helping us lose weight?
I mean, I think it's twofold. So we know that, you know, for people that are overweight, people that have obesity, losing weight is good for their health. And I mean, in people with type 2 diabetes, controlling blood sugar also can help prevent these other health issues from happening. But at the same time, scientists do think that there is some weight loss independent effect that might be happening. And if you look at that SELECT trial, that huge heart disease trial, I think the data came out like a few months ago or last year. We've talked about it on the show before. One of the things that scientists are pointing to is the fact that like almost immediately, you know, in the two different patient populations, those that were taking the drug, those that weren't, like a week into the trial or something, before there was even any weight loss, you can see this split with the group that's taking the drug versus the group that's not. Like the group that was taking it was already seeing